Um, Imagine waking up tomorrow and, discovering that not only has your government completely collapsed, but the entire concept of the alphabet has just been wiped from human memory.
Right.
Like, nobody can read, nobody can write, the servers are down, the books are burned, and for the next, 300 years, humanity is plunged into total illiteracy.
Yeah, it is a terrifying scenario.
It sounds like a pitch for a dystopian sci-fi movie, right? But that is actually exactly what happened to ancient Greece.
It really is. And, it's the absolute foundation of the civilization we're discussing today.
Right.
We tend to look back at history and we see this straight, comforting line of progress. Like humanity just keeps building upward.
Totally.
But the true story of Greece just completely shatters that illusion.
Which is exactly why we are so thrilled to have you with us for today's deep dive. Because our mission today for you listening is to really explore the sweeping, often brutal, and profoundly brilliant saga of the rise and fall of ancient Greece. Because when most of us picture ancient Greece, we see a very curated, sanitized snapshot.
Oh, absolutely.
We picture, white marble temples, toga-wearing philosophers calmly debating in a sunlit plaza, and the birth of democracy.
Right. It's all very neat and tidy.
Right. But we are looking at a massive stack of sources today. We're pulling from deep archaeological timelines, comprehensive mythic histories, and modern sociological analyses, and they all tell a very different story.
Yeah, that pristine image of marble and democracy captures, at best, one specific century and one specific city.
5th century BC Athens.
Right, exactly. It completely ignores the thousands of years of civilizational collapse, reinvention, and warfare that surround it.
Wow.
I mean, the reality of Greek history is much closer to a high-speed collision of environmental catastrophes, ruthless imperialism, and unparalleled intellectual leaps.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the story of Greece isn't just a smooth ride to the Parthenon, where do we actually start?
So, to understand the rise of classical Greece, we actually have to go backward in time to a completely different civilization.
Okay.
A civilization that had to be practically wiped off the map before the Greeks, as we know them, could even take the stage.
Wait, wiped off the map?
Completely. We need to go back to the Bronze Age, roughly 2700 BC, to the island of Crete, and a people we call the Minoans.
Now, what blows my mind about the Minoans is that the classical Greeks, the ones writing the philosophy and building the democracy, they didn't actually know who they were.
Right.
They were just myths to them. We didn't truly rediscover the Minoans until the early 1900s when Sir Arthur Evans started digging at Knossos.
And the civilization Evans unearthed was just staggering in its sophistication.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about the 2nd millennium BC, yet he found massive labyrinthine palace complexes spanning acres.
Wow.
Yeah. They were multi-story structures made of smooth, quarried stone. They had light wells, extensive underground plumbing.
Wait, plumbing in the 2nd millennium BC?
Oh, yeah. Flushed toilets.
Yeah.
And these vibrant frescoes everywhere depicting bull leaping and marine life.
But the detail in the archaeological records that always catches my eye is what you don't find at Knossos.
Right, the walls.
Exactly. There are no massive defensive walls anywhere.
Which is a critical observation. The Minoan palace complexes were completely unfortified.
Which, that tells us so much about their psychology, right?
Yeah.
And their geopolitical position.
Absolutely.
If you don't build walls, you either believe your navy is so dominant that no one can ever touch your island, or your society is entirely structured around peaceful, mercantile trade rather than territorial conquest.
Right.
And when you look at how these palaces functioned, they weren't just giant castles for a king to sit in and look intimidating.
No, not at all.
The layout, with hundreds of interconnected rooms and those massive terracotta storage jars, the pithoi and artisan workshops, it functions almost exactly like a massive Amazon fulfillment center.
I love that analogy because it actually maps perfectly onto the economic reality of the Bronze Age. Yeah. The Minoans operated on what we call a centralized redistributive economy.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, in a pre-currency world, the farmers, shepherds, and artisans from the surrounding countryside would bring their raw goods like olive oil, grain, wool, wine into this massive centralized hub.
Right.
The palace bureaucracy would inventory everything using their unique, still undeciphered script known as Linear A.
Right, because we still can't read it.
Exactly. They'd store the goods, process some of them into luxury items like perfumes or textiles, and then redistribute them back to the population or trade them overseas.
So you bring in 10 jars of olive oil, the scribes tally it up, and you get your ration of grain and a bronze tool in return.
Precisely. It is a highly efficient, massively interconnected supply chain.
But of course, they weren't the only players on the board. While the Minoans are running this island trade empire, a very different kind of culture is brewing over on the Greek mainland.
Yes. Here we turn to the Mycenaeans, who dominated the mainland from about 1600 to 1100 BC. And the crucial distinction here is that the Mycenaeans are the first truly Greek-speaking culture in the historical record.
Because of their writing, right.
Yes, they actually adapted the Minoan writing system into a new script, Linear B, specifically to write an archaic form of Greek.
But their entire vibe is just the polar opposite of the Minoans.
Oh, completely.
If the Minoans were the cosmopolitan, unfortified merchants of the Mediterranean, the Mycenaeans were like heavily armored, highly aggressive warlords.
And their architecture reflects that aggression perfectly.
Yeah.
Instead of open, sprawling trade hubs, the Mycenaeans built imposing fortress palaces on high, defensible hills, places like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Thebes.
And the walls were huge.
Massive. They surrounded these citadels with walls made of stone blocks so incredibly large that later generations of Greeks genuinely believed only mythical one-eyed giants, the Cyclops, could have lifted them.
Wow, so that's where the term Cyclopean masonry comes from.
Exactly.
And the graves, too.
Yeah.
When archaeologists excavated the shaft graves at Mycenae, they found just obscene amounts of wealth.
Oh, it was incredible.
Solid gold death masks, beautifully inlaid bronze daggers depicting lion hunts. They had amber from the Baltic, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan.
Right, which paints a picture of a warrior elite that glorified martial prowess, but also accumulated wealth through conquest and piracy just as much as trade.
And they were pretty expansionist, right?
Very much so. In fact, the archaeological record suggests that around 1450 BC, the Mycenaeans actually conquered Minoan Crete.
Just took over the fulfillment centers.
Basically, yeah. They took over those very administrative centers we just discussed and became the undisputed apex predators of the Aegean Sea.
But their dominance sets up one of the most terrifying events in human history. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean civilization doesn't just decline. It completely vaporizes in an event we call the Bronze Age collapse.
It is arguably the most catastrophic systems failure in antiquity.
I mean, how fast did it happen?
Within a few decades, almost every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed or was severely crippled. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia was wiped out. The Egyptian New Kingdom barely survived, but they lost all their foreign territories. And across Greece, every single major Mycenaean palace was violently destroyed by fire and subsequently abandoned.
I really want to dig into the how and the why of this, because it wasn't just a bad year for crops, right? It was a domino effect.
Absolutely.
If you look at the sources, the Bronze Age Mediterranean was heavily globalized. To make bronze, you need copper and tin. You can get copper from Cyprus, but tin had to be imported all the way from places like modern-day Afghanistan.
Exactly. It was a hyper-specialized, deeply fragile international supply chain.
Right.
If one node in that network failed, the entire system was at risk.
So imagine severe climatic shifts hitting the region. Prolonged droughts lead to consecutive crop failures.
Yes.
When the crops fail in a centralized, redistributive economy, the palace has no food to hand out. The fulfillment center is empty.
Which completely shatters the social contract. The elites in the palaces lose their legitimacy overnight. You immediately see internal peasant revolts. Furthermore, the drought triggers mass migrations of starving, desperate people.
The sea peoples.
Yes, these are the mysterious sea peoples mentioned in Egyptian records, and they weren't a unified army.
Right, they were more like refugees.
Exactly. Massive fleets of climate refugees turn raiders. They're sweeping down the coastlines, destroying port cities, and severing those fragile international trade routes.
And no trade routes means no tin. No tin means no bronze.
Exactly.
Suddenly, your weapons are breaking, your tools are useless, your food is gone, and your cities are literally burning.
And to make matters worse, there's evidence of a phenomenon called earthquake storms.
Wait, earthquake storms?
Yeah, a sequence of severe tectonic shifts ripping through the fault lines of the Aegean over a 50-year period.
So it is a literal perfect storm.
What's fascinating here is that the environmental data provides a precedent. Centuries earlier, around 1628 BC, the Minoans suffered a massive blow when the volcanic island of modern Santorini erupted.
Like Pompeii.
Exactly. It perfectly preserved a Minoan settlement in ash. It was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, plunging the region into a multi-year winter and sending tsunamis crashing into Crete.
Right.
That earlier catastrophe severely destabilized the Minoan Empire, which allowed the Mycenaeans to rise.
Oh, I see.
Now, in 1200 BC, a slower but equally devastating combination of climate, tectonic, and social disasters brought the Mycenaeans down.
And the aftermath is what brings us back to that terrifying scenario I mentioned at the start of the deep dive. The palaces burn. The elites are killed or they flee.
Yes.
And because the only people who knew how to write Linear B were the specialized accountants working inside those palaces, the knowledge of writing dies with them.
It is a profound civilizational amnesia.
So this plunges the region into what historians call the Dark Ages, right?
Yes. For 3 centuries, from roughly 1100 to 800 BC, the population plummeted by as much as 90% in some areas.
80%. That's apocalyptic.
It really is. Monumental architecture ceased. International trade vanished. The survivors abandoned the smoldering ruins of the citadels and dispersed into small, isolated, impoverished farming villages.
But the ruins didn't disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part that feels like a fantasy novel to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Centuries later, the descendants of those survivors are living in small, mud brick huts, but they are looking up at the colossal 50-foot thick stone walls of Mycenae.
Right.
And they have absolutely no memory of who built them.
They are living in the graveyard of their own civilization.
So they logically assume, well, mere mortals couldn't have done this. We certainly can't. This must have been the work of gods or the sons of gods.
And that psychological disconnect is the genesis of the Greek heroic age.
Wow.
The faint, distorted oral memories of wealthy, warlike Mycenaean kings launching armadas across the sea slowly morphed over centuries into the epic poetry of Homer.
So Agamemnon and Achilles, the Trojan War.
Exactly. These are the mythologized echoes of a Bronze Age reality that the later Greeks were trying desperately to explain to themselves.
That's an incredible origin story. But I want to challenge the term Dark Ages for a moment.
Okay, how so?
Because it implies that everything just paused, right? That it was a void of useless time. But if you look at the mechanics of what happens next, wasn't this collapse actually kind of the necessary drafting table for classical Greece?
Oh, I would take it a step further. Without the bloated Bronze Age kings and their collapse, the Greece we know could never have existed.
Right. If the massive centralized Mycenaean kings had survived, they probably would have just evolved into giant monolithic empires like the Persians or the Egyptians.
Precisely. The destruction of that top-down system cleared the board entirely. And this brings geography into the equation, which is arguably the most important factor in Greek history.
Geography is destiny, right?
It really is. Greece is not a massive, fertile river valley like in the Nile or the Tigris-Euphrates. It is a fiercely mountainous peninsula, fractured by deep ravines, steep mountain ranges, and hundreds of islands.
You literally can't build a massive, unified land empire because you can barely march an army over the mountain to the next valley. The terrain forces isolation.
Well, exactly. So as the climate stabilized and the population slowly began to recover during the Archaic period from roughly 800 to 480 BC, those small, isolated farming villages didn't merge into a single kingdom.
Right.
Instead, they evolved independently into the defining political innovation of Greek history, the polis, or the city-state.
And we need to be really clear about what a polis is, because it's not just a city like modern-day Chicago or London.
No, applying modern municipal concepts to the polis misses the mark entirely.
How so?
The polis was a self-governing community of citizens. It encompassed the urban center and the surrounding agricultural land, but more importantly, it was the absolute center of a Greek person's psychological and moral universe.
To a Greek, you weren't a Greek first. You were an Athenian, or a Spartan, or a Corinthian.
Exactly. Your polis had its own laws, its own calendar, its own unique festivals, its own patron deity, and its own standing army.
And if your polis failed, you cease to exist in any meaningful way, right?
The philosopher Aristotle later articulated this beautifully when he wrote that man is by nature a political animal. But a more accurate translation of his Greek is, man is an animal meant to live in a polis.
Wow.
To be exiled from your city-state was considered a fate worse than death because outside the polis you were stripped of your humanity and your connection to the divine.
So you have this landscape completely fractured into hundreds of these fiercely independent, highly competitive, heavily armed mini-nations.
Yes.
How on earth did they not just view each other as entirely different species? How did they ever develop a concept of Greece or being Hellenic.
That intense local isolation was counterbalanced by a very powerful pan-Hellenic identity. Even if an Athenian and a Theban were currently slaughtering each other on a battlefield, they recognized that they shared fundamental cultural bonds that separated them from the rest of the world.
First and foremost being language.
Yes, they spoke mutually intelligible dialects of Greek. To them, anyone who didn't speak Greek was a barbarian, a word that literally mocked the sound of foreign languages as just babbling bar, bar, bar.
That is so arrogant, but also so on brand.
Yeah.
They also share the same core pantheon of gods.
Right. Even if Athens favored Athena and Sparta favored Apollo, they all agreed Zeus was the king. And they formalized this shared identity through massive cultural institutions, the most famous being the Pan-Hellenic Games.
The Olympics.
Exactly. Traditionally established in 776 BC at the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia. Every 4 years, these warring city-states would declare a sacred truce.
Just put down the spears for a week.
Yeah, they would lay down their weapons, travel to Olympia, and compete fiercely but non-lethally to prove their physical and spiritual excellence. It was a vital pressure valve and a mechanism for maintaining a shared cultural network.
And it's right around the same time, the 8th century BC, that they finally get their voice back. They recover the ability to write.
Yes, and this is crucial.
But they don't go back to the clunky, bureaucratic accounting script of Linear B. They invent something revolutionary.
They encountered the Phoenician alphabet through maritime trade in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, the Phoenician script was highly effective, but it consisted entirely of consonants.
Right.
It worked well for Semitic languages, but it was highly ambiguous for a language as vowel-heavy as Greek.
Because if I write the letters B and T, you don't know if I mean bat, bet, bit, bot, or butt.
Exactly. You have to guess based on context, which means reading is still a highly specialized, difficult skill, mostly reserved for trained scribes.
So the Greeks made what is arguably one of the greatest intellectual leaps in the history of human communication.
They absolutely did. They repurposed several Phoenician letters that represented consonant sounds not present in Greek, and they assigned them to represent vowel sounds. Alpha, epsilon, iota, omicron, upsilon.
They created the first truly phonetic alphabet in human history. One symbol equals one distinct sound.
And the mechanism of why this matters so much cannot be overstated. It totally democratizes literacy.
Because you no longer need to study for 10 years to be a scribe, you can learn the alphabet in a few weeks.
Right. And because it captured the exact phonetic nuances of speech, you could use it to write down not just inventory lists of sheep and grain, but complex abstract thought.
Wow, yeah.
You could write down the rhythm of epic poetry, you could write down detailed philosophical arguments, you could write down binding legal codes that every citizen could read in the town square.
And this alphabet is the direct ancestor of Latin, Cyrillic, and virtually every modern European writing system.
It changed everything.
But armed with this new tool and a recovering population, the Greeks run into a massive problem. They become victims of their own success.
Demographic pressure.
Exactly. The population is booming, but the geography hasn't changed. The rocky valleys can only grow so much grain, so they start starving.
And demographic pressure in a geographically confined space inevitably leads to crisis.
Right.
By the 8th and 7th centuries BC, many city-states were facing famine and intense internal class warfare over land ownership. To relieve this pressure, they initiated a massive organized wave of expansion.
But this wasn't colonization in the modern sense. It wasn't an empire sending out ships to conquer territory and send wealth back to a king. As you look through the sources, the mechanism is completely different.
How would you describe it?
It was more like a cell dividing.
Oh, a biological analogy is very fitting. A mother city or metropolis would select a portion of its population, put them on ships, and send them out to find arable land.
Right.
They would sail to a new coastline, displace or assimilate the local population, and found a brand new, politically independent polis.
So the new city would share the dialect, the gods, and the culture of the mother city, but it owed no political obedience to it.
Exactly.
And they spread like wildfire, from Spain in the west to the shores of the Black Sea in the east.
The colonial expansion was incredibly dense in southern Italy and Sicily. They founded cities so wealthy and powerful places like Syracuse and Neapolis, which is modern-day Naples, that the Romans later referred to the entire region as Magna Graecia, or Great Greece.
But the colonies that always fascinate me the most are the ones to the east, on the western coast of modern-day Turkey, a region they called Ionia.
Oh, Ionia is Fascinating.
Because if you read the standard history books, it always sounds like Athens invented everything. But the sources show that these Ionian Greeks, the Eastern Greeks, were actually the pioneers of Greek intellectual brilliance long before Athens hit its stride.
It is a critical corrective to the Athens-centric view of history. The geographic placement of the Ionian cities put them directly on the frontier of the massive ancient Near Eastern empires.
First Lydia, and then the mighty Persian Empire.
Right. And because they were at this cultural crossroads, they were exposed to vastly different ways of thinking. They gained access to centuries of Babylonian astronomical records and Egyptian mathematical traditions.
But rather than just absorbing that information, the Ionian Greeks applied a radically new framework to it.
This is where we see the birth of the pre-Socratic philosophers in the 6th century BC. Thinkers like Thales of Miletus and Pythagoras.
These guys were the first to look at the universe and say, hold on. What if the sun isn't just a god driving a chariot across the sky? What if an earthquake isn't just Poseidon having a temper tantrum?
Exactly. What if there are underlying and natural rational laws governing the physical world?
They attempted to explain natural phenomena through observation and logic, entirely divorced from divine intervention.
It was a seismic shift in human consciousness. They were taking the very first tentative steps toward what we now recognize as the scientific method.
But, and this is a big but, even with these brilliant minds trying to logic their way through the universe, the vast majority of Greeks, from Sicily to the Black Sea, still relied on a deeply ingrained, shared system to understand their world.
The mythology.
We have to talk about the mythology, because to the Greeks, these weren't just bedtime stories.
Not at all. Their mythology served as their history, their civic ideology, their moral framework, and their explanation for the human condition.
Yes.
And if you analyze their creation myth, it tells you exactly how they viewed the fundamental nature of existence.
It doesn't start with a benevolent creator crafting a perfect garden. It starts with chaos, a yawning, terrifying void.
Right.
And out of that void emerges Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. And their union doesn't produce humans. It produces monstrous elemental forces.
Yes, they produce the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Hundred-Handed Ones. These beings represent the raw, untamed, and often destructive forces of the natural world.
And what follows is a cycle of intense generational violence. Uranus is terrified of his monstrous children, so he imprisons them deep within the earth, causing Gaia immense pain.
So she recruits her youngest Titan's son, Cronus, gives him a flint sickle, and tells him to ambush his father.
And Cronus violently castrates Uranus, seizing control of the cosmos.
And in one of those incredibly telling mythic details, the severed flesh of Uranus falls into the churning sea, and out of the bloody sea foam emerges Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty.
It is a brilliant sociological metaphor.
It really is. To the Greeks, love and desire were not merely gentle, pure emotions. They were beautiful, yes, but they were born of violence, inherently chaotic, and capable of destroying lives and cities.
Just look at the Trojan War, fought entirely over desire.
Exactly.
So Cronus takes over, but he knows the rule of the universe.
Right.
The son always overthrows the father. To prevent this, every time his sister wife Rhea gives birth, he swallows the infant gods whole.
It is the ultimate manifestation of a tyrant desperately clinging to power by consuming his own future.
But Rhea hides her sixth child, Zeus, on the island of Crete. Zeus grows up, poisons Cronus, and forces him to vomit up his fully grown divine siblings.
And this triggers the Titanomachy.
A 10-year, earth-shattering war between the old Titans and the new Olympian gods.
And Zeus wins by recruiting the monsters his father had imprisoned. The Cyclops forge his thunderbolts. And once the Titans are cast down into Tartarus, the new gods must establish a governing order.
And how do they decide who rules what? They don't have a debate based on merit. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, literally draw lots.
Right, it's a game of chance.
Zeus gets the sky, Poseidon gets the sea, and Hades draws the short straw and goes to the underworld.
The mechanism of their rule is incredibly revealing. The cosmos is not organized by absolute moral goodness. It is organized by domains of sheer power and blind luck.
Which brings us back to the psychology of the Greeks. Here's where it gets really interesting. Why would a civilization invent gods like this?
Right.
If you look at the Olympians, they aren't offering spiritual salvation. They act more like a superpowered mafia family.
That's a great way to put it.
They cheat on their spouses. They murder people who insult them. They are governed entirely by lust, jealousy, and pride.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the environment the Greeks lived in, it makes perfect sense.
How so?
They lived on a tectonic fault line, surrounded by a sea that could provide immense wealth through trade or instantly drown an entire fleet in a sudden storm. Their reality was unpredictable, beautiful, and highly deadly.
So they created gods that mirrored that reality. You can't negotiate morally with a hurricane, just like you can't negotiate morally with Poseidon. You just try to appease him and survive.
Precisely. The gods and heroes were reflections of the natural world and of human nature itself.
Right.
This worldview bred a deep inherent pessimism about the trajectory of history, which the poet Hesiod codified in his concept of the 5 ages of man.
Hesiod basically argues that things are only getting worse. He starts with the Golden Age, where humans lived like gods without pain or labor. Then a Silver Age of foolishness, a Bronze Age of terrifying violent men obsessed with war. Then a brief spike in quality with the Heroic Age.
The heroic age being the era of the demigods, the men of divine blood who fought at Troy or sailed with Jason.
But then it all crashes down into Hesiod's present reality, which is how they rationalize their hard, toiling present compared to that glorious past, the Iron Age.
The Iron Age is characterized by relentless toil, misery, the breaking of oaths, and the constant threat of violence. To the Greeks, they were living in the ashes of a greater past.
Wow.
They believed humanity was fundamentally flawed and in a state of moral decline.
But within that pessimism, there was this intense, burning drive for greatness. Because they knew the gods didn't care about them, and they knew everyone eventually ends up as a meaningless shadow in Hades. The only way to achieve immortality was through Cleo's glory.
Yes. You achieve immortality by doing deeds so incredibly great that future generations are forced to sing songs about you forever.
Exactly. And that's where the heroes come in, the demigods. Perseus slaying Medusa, Jason and the Argonauts, the inescapable fate of Oedipus. These aren't just cool action stories. They are models for human behavior.
Right.
You have Heracles, who is driven mad by a jealous goddess, murders his family, and has to complete 12 impossible labors to atone.
Heracles wasn't just strong. His 12 labors represented human endurance and the desperate struggle for redemption in a world governed by capricious, unfair forces.
Yeah, then you have Theseus. He doesn't just go into the labyrinth and slay the Minotaur. To the Greeks, Theseus is the political founder of Athens.
Yes. The myth of Theseus is essentially political propaganda for the polis system. By slaying the Minotaur, a chaotic, hybrid monster born of unnatural lust, Theseus represents the triumph of civic order and rational law over the dark, untamed forces of the wild.
That makes so much sense.
He returns to Athens and unites the scattered villages of Attica into a single, cohesive state under the rule of law.
But to me, the myth that truly acts as the Rosetta Stone for understanding the Greek mind is the story of Prometheus.
Oh, Prometheus is fundamental.
He's a titan who looks at humanity shivering in the cold, takes pity on them, and steals fire from the gods.
And we must understand what fire represents here. It is not just warmth. It is technology.
Right.
It is metallurgy, cooking, engineering, and ultimately the spark of divine consciousness.
He gives them civilization. But Zeus is absolutely furious because the gods are deeply jealous of anything that makes mortals independent or powerful.
And Zeus's punishment is horrific. He chains Prometheus to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where every day an eagle tears out and eats his liver.
Ugh.
Because he is immortal, the liver regenerates overnight, only for the torture to begin again the next day.
It is such a dark warning.
Yeah.
It shows the Greek belief that human progress always comes with a heavy price, and the gods are inherently jealous of mortal independence. You cannot defy the natural order without suffering immense consequences.
It is a worldview that structurally guarantees conflict. If everyone is competing for a finite amount of glory in a deeply unfair universe, collision is inevitable.
And this shared mythic history and competitive spirit culminated in the defining conflict of Greek history, the clash between the ultimate city-states, Athens and Sparta.
Yes, but first they faced an existential threat that forced them to do something entirely against their nature.
They actually had to unite. We are entering the classical period, and it begins with a clash of civilizations, the Persian Wars.
By the 490s BC, the Persian Empire was the largest superpower the world had ever seen, stretching from Egypt to the borders of India.
And they looked across the Aegean at this chaotic, fractured network of Greek city-states and decided to absorb them, starting with Athens.
But the Athenians pull off the unthinkable.
Right. In 490 BC, a massive Persian expeditionary force lands on the beach at Marathon. The Athenians march out, vastly outnumbered, without Spartan help, and through sheer tactical brilliance and heavy infantry shock tactics, they utterly crush the Persian force.
It was a shocking upset, but it was only the prologue. 10 years later, in 480 BC, the new Persian king Xerxes launched a full-scale invasion of Greece.
With an army so massive, the logistics of feeding it are still debated by historians today.
This is the invasion that gives us the legendary Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies hold the narrow pass against the Persian hundreds of thousands for 3 days before being wiped out.
But while Thermopylae is culturally famous, the actual turning point of the war happened at sea. Athens had evacuated its entire population, abandoning their beautiful city to be burned to the ground by Xerxes.
Yes.
But under the command of the brilliant, cunning general Themistocles, the Greek coalition fleet lured the massive, cumbersome Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis.
The Persian ships get bottlenecked. The heavier Greek triremes ram them to pieces. The Persian fleet is destroyed. Xerxes panics and flees back to Asia. And against all conceivable odds, the Greeks win the war.
The psychological impact of this unified Greek victory on the Greek mind, and specifically the Athenian mind, cannot be overstated.
They had defeated the greatest empire on earth. They believed it was a total validation of their system, their gods, and their unique character.
Athens essentially says, "We saved Greece. We are the greatest." And they ride this massive wave of adrenaline and supreme self-confidence straight into what we call the golden age of Athens, spanning the classical period from 480 to 393 BC.
The 5th century BC in Athens is an explosion of cultural and intellectual achievement that shaped the trajectory of human history.
It's wild.
Under the leadership of the statesman Pericles, Athens funneled immense wealth into rebuilding their ruined city. They constructed the Parthenon on the Acropolis not just as a temple to Athena, but as a monumental billboard advertising their own invincibility.
And the ideas being generated in the streets below the Parthenon were just as monumental. You have the invention, the radical expansion of direct democracy, where thousands of ordinary male citizens are actively voting on every major policy.
You have Socrates walking through the marketplace, aggressively interrogating people about the definition of justice and truth.
You have the invention of theatrical tragedy. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were writing deeply complex psychological dramas that challenged the morality of the gods and the consequences of human arrogance.
And you have figures like Herodotus and Thucydides who invent the very discipline of history. They stop blaming endless on the whims of the gods and start meticulously analyzing human motives, political power, and economics.
But this era of undeniable brilliance casts a very, very dark side.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the wealth building the Parthenon and funding the democracy wasn't just coming from Athenian silver mines. It was coming from an extortion racket.
Following the Persian Wars, Athens organized a defensive alliance of maritime Greek states called the Delian League, originally headquartered on the sacred island of Delos.
The goal was to maintain a unified navy to protect against any future Persian attacks.
Right. Each city was supposed to contribute ships or money. But over a few decades, Athens realizes, hey, we command the fleet. No one can stop us.
So they transform it.
They move the treasury from Delos to Athens. They stop asking for voluntary contributions and start demanding mandatory tribute.
The defensive league metastasized into a tyrannical Athenian empire.
If a smaller city-state decided the Persian threat was gone and tried to leave the league, the Athenian navy would arrive, besiege the city, tear down its walls, confiscate its fleet, and sometimes execute its men and enslave its women and children.
The ultimate hypocrisy. The city that championed freedom and democracy for its own citizens became a ruthless, imperial oppressor to its fellow Greeks.
And this aggressive expansion terrified the other major power on the peninsula,
Sparta.
The Spartans operated on an entirely different societal model. They were an ultra-conservative, highly militarized land power.
Right.
They didn't rely on trade or an empire of tribute. They relied on the brutal subjugation of a massive enslaved population known as the Helots, who farmed the land while Spartan citizens dedicated their entire lives from childhood to military training.
So Athens is this dynamic, restless naval superpower expanding everywhere. Sparta is this paranoid, static, invincible land army, terrified of change.
The tension between them becomes unbearable, and in 431 BC, it finally snaps, triggering the Peloponnesian War.
A devastating 27-year civil war. It's basically like two fiercely competitive rival sports teams who become so obsessed with destroying each other that they end up burning down the entire stadium.
That analogy is tragically accurate. Thucydides, who fought in and wrote the history of this war, famously argued that the conflict was inevitable. The growth of Athenian power caused profound fear in Sparta, leaving them no choice but to strike before Athens became utterly unstoppable.
And this wasn't just a quick border skirmish. It ripped the entire Greek world apart.
And it was deeply asymmetric. Sparta would march its invincible army into Athenian territory and burn the crops.
Athens would retreat behind its massive long walls, use its invincible navy to import food from the Black Sea, and sail around the coast to raid Spartan allies.
It was a brutal conflict of attrition that degraded the moral fabric of Greece entirely. The violence escalated to unprecedented levels of atrocity.
And Athens suffered a catastrophic blow early on when a horrific plague broke out inside the overcrowded, besieged walls, wiping out perhaps a third of the population, including their great leader Pericles.
But eventually, through a series of disastrous Athenian blunders, like sending their entire fleet on a megalomaniacal invasion of Sicily where it was utterly annihilated, Sparta gains the upper hand.
They even make a deal with their old enemy, the Persians, to get money to build a fleet. In 404 BC, Athens finally surrenders.
The Spartans compel the Athenians to tear down their beloved long walls to the sound of flute music. They dismantle the Athenian Empire and briefly install a vicious, oligarchic puppet government known as the 30 Tyrants.
So the history books generally say Sparta won the war. But I have to push back on the idea of a Spartan victory here.
Okay, why is that?
Because earlier, we established that the polis system requires resources and stability. The Peloponnesian War left the entire Greek world, including Sparta, bankrupt, depopulated, and completely exhausted. Did Sparta actually win anything, or did they just inherit a ruined house they had no idea how to manage?
Your skepticism is entirely justified. It was a textbook Pyrrhic victory. The Spartans were brilliant tactical fighters, but they were utterly incompetent imperial administrators.
Right.
Their arrogant attempts to rule the former Athenian Empire quickly alienated all their allies. Within a few decades, Sparta itself was defeated and permanently crippled by the rising power of Thebes.
Thebes takes over, then they get exhausted. It's a revolving door of misery.
And this exposes the tragic irony, the fatal flaw of the classical era. The polis system, the very thing that gave Greece its unique brilliance, was fundamentally flawed.
How so?
It structurally guaranteed a condition the Greeks called stasis, or endless factional discord. Because no city-state was ever willing to share absolute power, and no city-state was willing to submit to another, they were trapped in an endless cycle of mutual exhaustion.
It brings us right back to their mythology. They were literally living out the narrative of the Trojan War, which was an analogy the Greeks themselves used.
Exactly.
A massive, decades-long conflict fought over pride and oaths. Troy is burned to the ground, but the victorious Greeks end up just as cursed and broken as the city they burned to the ground.
The epic poems of Homer were not merely entertainment. They were a cultural mirror reflecting the devastating cost of unchecked pride and the tragedy of a civilization consuming itself.
Wow.
By the mid-300s BC, the politically fractured, exhausted Greek city-states were sitting ducks. They had spent a century bleeding each other dry, completely ignoring a rising power to the north that they had previously dismissed as barbarians.
Enter the Macedonians. And this is where the map of the world gets completely rewritten.
While Athens, Sparta, and Thebes were locked in their cycle of stasis, the Kingdom of Macedonia was quietly undergoing a radical transformation under a brilliant, utterly ruthless king named Philip II.
Philip is one of history's ultimate opportunists.
He really is.
He looks at the squabbling Greeks down south, exhausted and bankrupt, and realizes they are ripe for the taking. But he doesn't just charge in. He revolutionizes warfare.
Yes, he invents the Macedonian phalanx, equipping his infantry with massive 18-foot-long pikes called sarissas, creating an impenetrable wall of spear points that rendered traditional Greek hoplite tactics obsolete.
Armed with this new military machine and utilizing a masterful blend of bribery, diplomacy, and brute force, Philip systematically dismantled the independence of the Greek city-states.
In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, he crushed a combined army of Athens and Thebes. For the first time in history, the fiercely independent Greek peninsula was forcibly unified under a single hegemon.
Philip does what no Greek could ever do, but he doesn't get to enjoy it for long. He's assassinated at a wedding before he can launch his ultimate master plan, a united Greek invasion of the Persian Empire.
And the crown and the army falls to his son, who is only 20 years old.
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great.
Talk about a historical jump scare. This 20-year-old kid takes the reins, and over the next 13 years, he goes on a military rampage that defies belief.
We must look at the mechanics of what Alexander accomplished, because it was not merely a string of lucky battles.
Yeah.
He possessed unparalleled tactical genius, an intuitive grasp of logistics, and an absolute terrifying belief in his own divine destiny.
He doesn't just beat the Persians. He completely dismantles an empire of 50 million people.
Yes.
He wins massive set-piece battles against the Persian king Darius at Issus and Gaugamela. He conducts brilliant, brutal sieges, like building a land bridge half a mile into the ocean to conquer the island fortress of Tyre.
He marches his army through deserts and over mountains, conquering everything from Egypt to the Indus Valley in modern-day India.
But his genius wasn't just military, it was administrative.
Right. Alexander understood that you cannot rule a vast, multi-ethnic empire purely by the sword. He initiated a radical policy of cultural fusion.
Yeah?
He integrated Persian cavalry into his army, adopted Persian royal dress, and orchestrated mass marriages between his Greek generals and Persian noblewomen.
He was trying to create a unified global elite.
Mm-hmm.
But his reign is an absolute flash in the pan.
Yes, very brief.
In 323 BC, after surviving countless battles and wounds, he dies of a sudden fever in Babylon. He's only 32 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And on his deathbed, when asked who should inherit this massive, unprecedented empire, he supposedly whispers, "To the strongest."
Which is essentially a declaration of civil war. With no clear heir, his top generals, known as the Diadochi or successors, immediately begin carving up the empire.
It fractures into massive warring kingdoms. You get the Ptolemies in Egypt, which is the dynasty that eventually produces Cleopatra. You get the massive Seleucids in Syria. And this fragmentation officially kicks off a brand new epoch, the Hellenistic period, lasting from 323 to 146 BC.
The Hellenistic era represents a profound paradigm shift in the daily reality of the Greeks. The classical era of the small, intimately scaled, self-governing polis was completely dead.
Wow.
Power was no longer debated in the Athenian assembly. It was dictated by absolute monarchs ruling from palatial courts. The center of gravity shifted away from the Greek mainland to brand new cosmopolitan megacities founded by the conquerors, like Alexandria and Antioch.
So what does this all mean? We have to ask the big question here. Was Alexander destroying the beloved traditional democratic polis system a massive tragedy? Or was it actually a necessary, brutal upgrade that allowed Greek culture to break out of its rocky little peninsula and go global?
That is one of the great debates of antiquity, but a highly compelling argument is that by the 4th century BC, Greek culture and intellectual output had fundamentally outgrown Greek society.
Meaning the narrow, rigid political container of the city-state was simply too small for the explosive advancements in science, art, and philosophy they were generating.
Precisely. The polis was brilliant at fostering initial competition, but its constant warfare and xenophobia stifled broader progress. The Hellenistic period stripped the Greeks of their local political autonomy, but in return, it ushered in an era of unprecedented global connectivity and immense state-sponsored wealth.
It was like upgrading from a local dial-up network to a global broadband internet. Suddenly, Greek becomes the common universal language of administration, commerce, and education across the entire known world.
If you were an ambitious scholar in Egypt, a merchant in Babylon, or a diplomat in Syria, you spoke, read, and wrote in Greek.
And when you combine the analytical, rational framework of Greek philosophy with the ancient, massive data sets of Egyptian and Babylonian astronomy and mathematics, you get an absolute intellectual explosion.
This is the era of the Great Library of Alexandria. And it wasn't just a building with scrolls, it was the ancient equivalent of a massive research university.
The scientific achievements of the Hellenistic era far outstrip the classical period.
Without a doubt. You have Euclid founding geometry in the elements.
You have Aristarchus of Samos proposing a heliocentric model of the solar system, arguing the Earth revolves around the sun nearly 2 millennia before Copernicus.
You have Eratosthenes, a librarian at Alexandria who calculates the circumference of the Earth with staggering accuracy using nothing but the shadows cast by sticks in 2 different cities, and his knowledge of geometry.
It is a breathtaking leap of pure scientific reasoning. And you have Archimedes in Syracuse developing mechanical theories, calculating pi, and inventing advanced defensive siege engines.
It wasn't just science either, it was a profound cultural fusion. The Greeks started blending their deities with the gods of the people they conquered.
Like hybrid gods.
Exactly. They actively engineered hybrid gods like Serapis, who possessed the visual aesthetic of a bearded Greek god like Zeus, but held the religious attributes of Egyptian and Persian gods. It was a true, globalized melting pot designed to unify diverse populations.
But while the Greek successor kingdoms were busy fighting each other and getting incredibly rich in the East, a new power was rising in the West.
Yes.
A highly organized, hyper-militarized power that was entirely ready to put a final, definitive end to Greek political independence forever.
We are looking at the rise of Rome. By the 2nd century BC, Rome had survived the apocalyptic wars with Carthage, defeated Hannibal, and was rapidly expanding its hegemony across the Mediterranean.
And the Greeks, completely true to their fatal flaw, could not unite to face the threat.
No, they could not. Instead of forming a massive coalition against Rome, they kept inviting Roman legions into Greece to help them settle petty, centuries-old scores with their neighboring city-states.
They attempted to use Rome as a mercenary force in their internal stasis. But the Romans had no interest in being pawns. They quickly lost patience with the constant rebellions and arrogance of the Greek leagues.
In 146 BC, Rome decides to send a message that the entire world will understand. They don't just defeat a Greek army, they make a brutal, symbolic example of them.
The Roman conquest.
Yes. The Roman legions march on Corinth, one of the wealthiest and most beautiful cities in Greece. The sack of Corinth was a masterclass in Roman cruelty and efficiency.
They burned the city to the ashes.
They executed the adult male population. They enslaved tens of thousands of women and children, and they systematically looted the city's priceless artwork, shipping centuries of Greek cultural heritage back to Italy.
With the destruction of Corinth, Greece was officially absorbed into the Roman Republic as the province of Achaia. The political independence of the Greek Kolas was completely, permanently dead. But this is where history delivers its ultimate paradox.
The cultural paradox. The Roman poet Horace famously summarized the aftermath. Captive Greece took captive her fierce conqueror.
Rome conquered Greece militarily with absolute brutal efficiency, but Greece completely conquered Rome culturally.
The influx of plundered Greek art, enslaved Greek intellectuals, and Hellenistic philosophy triggered an absolute obsession among the Roman elite.
It reminds me of an incredibly innovative, brilliant indie band. Greece was this raw, chaotic, creative indie band that invented a totally new sound. Rome was the massive, ruthlessly efficient corporate record label that bought them out.
That's a great comparison.
Rome stripped them of all their creative control, their political autonomy. But they took that indie music and blasted it across the entire globe on massive stadium tours, ensuring they would never, ever be forgotten.
Wealthy Romans began employing educated Greek slaves as tutors for their children. They sent their young men to Athens to study philosophy, treating it as a sort of ancient university town. They adopted Greek art and architectural orders to build their own monumental structures.
They even mapped their religion directly over the Olympians. The Romans looked at their native gods and just copy-pasted. Zeus got a new coat of paint and became Jupiter. Ares became Mars.
Aphrodite became Venus.
They took the rich, complex Greek mythology and just swapped out the names for Latin ones.
And crucially, in the eastern half of the massive Roman Empire, Greek remained the undisputed language of commerce, philosophy, science, and diplomacy. Latin was the language of the army, but Greek was the language of the mind.
But as the centuries pass, and the Roman Empire eventually embraces new, singular faiths, eventually Christianity, that old mythic age slowly fades away.
The temples of Olympus were closed by Christian emperors. The Pan-Hellenic Olympic Games, deeply tied to pagan worship, were outlawed. The gods transitioned from literal beings worshipped with blood sacrifices to literary symbols.
But the true legacy of Greece was never just their marble statues, right?
This raises an important question about what they actually left us. The most vital legacy of ancient Greece was their insistence on questioning the universe. Through democracy, philosophy, and history, they became the foundational DNA of Western civilization.
They didn't just give us marble statues, they gave us the framework for how to think.
Exactly. And that operating system survived the collapse of antiquity. The Greek legacy survived through the Byzantine Empire until 1453 and straight into the Renaissance.
And because Greek was the universal intellectual language of the Roman Empire for centuries, we have to mention that the entire New Testament of the Christian Bible was originally written in Greek. The impact of this civilization is literally inescapable.
It is woven into the very fabric of how we perceive the universe.
Which brings us to the end of this massive, sweeping journey. For you, the listener, We have traversed thousands of years of human triumph and catastrophe today.
A truly incredible journey.
We started in the mysterious fiery ashes of the Bronze Age collapse, when humanity literally forgot how to write. We witnessed the hyper-competitive birth of the city-state. We saw the absolute pinnacle of Athenian democracy, the global sprawl of Alexander, and the eternal cultural afterlife within Rome.
It is a narrative of profound resilience and unparalleled intellectual courage.
But before we officially sign off, I want to leave you with one final mind-bending fact to mull over. We talked at the very beginning about how we incorrectly assume history is a straight line of progress. Well, during the Hellenistic period, a ship sank off the coast of Crete, carrying what we now call the Antikythera mechanism.
It is an artifact that completely shatters our standard timeline of human technological development.
When scientists finally X-rayed it, they realized it was an incredibly complex, bronze-geared analog computer. It was used to calculate exact astronomical positions, predict eclipses decades in advance, and track the cycles of the Olympic Games.
It utilized a level of mechanical engineering that would not be seen again on Earth until the development of astronomical clocks in Europe over 1,000 years later.
It proves that the Greeks of the Hellenistic era were on the absolute precipice of a mechanical and perhaps even an industrial revolution.
They possess the raw materials for an entirely different future.
So I want you to imagine, as you think back on all the wars, the factional discord, and the brilliant minds we talked about today, what if the political infighting hadn't exhausted them? What if Rome hadn't conquered them? How entirely different, how incredibly advanced might our modern world look today if the Greeks had been allowed to just keep building their future?
It is a tantalizing what if that forces us to question the extreme fragility of human progress itself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closer and keep questioning the world around you.
You know, usually when you picture ancient Greece, there's this very immediate, highly specific image that comes to mind.
Oh, definitely. It is always the marble.
Right. You walk into the British Museum or, the Louvre, and you see those towering marble statues of the gods.
And they are just pristine, pure white marble, perfectly proportioned, and just utterly calm.
Exactly. It creates this aura of absolute clean perfection, like they had it all figured out.
It really feels very elevated, doesn't it? Almost sterile.
Yes, sterile is the perfect word.
It is as if the people who carved them lived these incredibly detached, philosophical lives, just floating above the dirt and the grime of the actual world.
But the reality from what we are looking at in this massive stack of sources today is that those statues were originally painted.
Yes, heavily painted.
And not just in tasteful pastels. They were covered in these loud, garish, almost tacky colors.
We are talking blinding bright blues, harsh reds, thick gold leaf.
By our modern aesthetic standards, it was messy, it was loud, it was deeply, sometimes uncomfortably human.
And that physical paint, just peeling and bright and chaotic, is honestly the perfect metaphor for the mythology itself.
Oh, absolutely.
We have this tendency today to view Greek myth as this neat, clean family tree of deities, right? Just handing down elegant laws from the clouds.
Like a structured corporate org chart or something.
Right, exactly. But when you actually read the ancient texts, and more importantly, when you overlay those texts with the real brutal history of the people who worship them,
it just shatters that illusion completely.
it really does. It is the absolute definition of a messy, violent, and desperate survival guide.
That messy, loud, violent paint is exactly what the religion actually looked like on the ground.
It was survival.
Today we are taking the historical timeline of ancient Greece and laying it directly over their mythology to see how one created the other.
Which is such a fascinating way to look at it.
We want to map out this 3,500-year-old unbroken chain of storytelling. We are going to see how a culture used these wild, often terrifying stories to make sense of the cosmos.
And to navigate cutthroat politics. And to process human tragedy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the ancient Greeks, you can't just read the history book, and you can't just read the myth.
No, you really can't.
Yeah.
You have to understand that to a Greek living in, say, 800 BC, those two things were the exact same thing.
They didn't separate them at all.
Not even a little bit. These myths aren't fairy tales told around a campfire to just keep the kids entertained. They were the DNA of an entire civilization.
We are talking about a cultural identity that survived Bronze Age collapses, the plunging of an entire society into centuries of dark ages, and the rise and fall of massive empires.
These stories were their science, their geopolitical justifications, and their mirror.
So if we are going to trace this from the beginning, we have to start before the marble temples.
Way before.
Before the heroes, before even the gods themselves. We have to start in the primordial era.
The very beginning.
According to the Greek creation myth, it all begins with chaos. But I want to pause right here because I feel like modern English has completely ruined this word for us.
Oh, it absolutely has.
When I say chaos, I mean like my kitchen after a holiday dinner party. I mean disorder, frenzy, things crashing into each other.
Just a mess.
Right. But reading through the ancient cosmogony, that is not at all what the Greeks meant by that word.
No, the Greek word chaos translates more accurately to a yawning void, a chasm.
Like an emptiness.
Exactly. A gaping nothingness without form or direction. It wasn't good, it wasn't evil, and it certainly wasn't a swirl of messy energy. It just was.
It is so hard to wrap your head around.
Try to imagine the absolute silence of deep space before the stars even ignite.
Just total blackness.
Right. And from this ancient, silent void, the first elemental truths begin to spontaneously take shape.
But there is no creator god yet, right?
No, you don't have a creator god forming things out of clay yet. You just have massive concepts snapping into reality.
So what comes first?
First, you get Gaia, which is the earth. Vast, unshaking, the foundation of all things.
Okay, the earth makes sense.
Then you get Tartarus, which is the deep, dreadful abyss beneath the earth. And crucially, you get Eros.
Eros. Wait, isn't Eros the little cherub with the bow and arrow, like Cupid?
Yeah, that's the Romanized, heavily watered down later version.
So he wasn't a baby in a diaper.
The primordial Eros was absolutely not a cute baby in a diaper. Primordial Eros was the terrifying, undeniable force of procreation and desire.
Oh, wow.
It is the binding agent that makes all future creation possible. Without this primal urge for things to join together, the universe just stays a static void.
Okay, so you have Earth, the abyss, and the urge to reproduce. What else comes out of the void?
You get Nyx, who is night, and Erebus, which is the crushing darkness of the underworld.
Is this incredibly atmospheric, almost oppressive beginning?
Very oppressive. And Gaia, the earth, propelled by that force of Eros, doesn't just sit there.
Starts create.
Right. From her own body, without a partner, she creates Uranus, the sky. And Uranus arches over her, creating the first domed heaven over the flat earth.
And once the earth and the sky are locked together, things escalate quickly. Because from their union, we get the first generation of what we would recognize as true divine powers.
The Titans.
The Titans. According to the sources, there are 12 of them, 6 sons and 6 daughters.
And these Titans represent the scaffolding of the natural and moral world. You have Oceanus, who wasn't just the ocean.
What was he then?
He was the encircling freshwater river that the Greeks believed wrapped around the entire flat disk of the world.
Oh, interesting.
You also have Themis, the embodiment of divine law and fairness. Mnemosyne, who is the literal concept of memory.
And then there's the big one.
Yes, the youngest, the most ambitious, and the most cunning of them all, Cronus.
But Gaia and Uranus don't just have these beautiful, powerful Titan children. Gaia also gives birth to things that are genuinely horrific.
True monsters.
She gives birth to the Cyclops, these towering blacksmiths with a single eye burning in the center of their foreheads.
And she gives birth to the Hecatoncheires.
Which are these unimaginable monstrosities, like giants with 100 hands and 50 heads each.
Try to picture that for a second. A creature with 50 heads and 100 grasping arms.
It is terrifying.
It really is. And Uranus, who is the sky, looks down at these monstrous children he helped create, and he is absolutely revulsed by them.
He hates them.
He is terrified of their raw, chaotic power. So he commits the universe's first act of horrific violence. He shoves them back into Gaia.
Wait, literally?
Literally, he forces them back into the depths of the earth, locking them away in the dark.
The physical imagery there is deeply unsettling. He is shoving them back into the womb of the earth.
It is horrific.
And the sources say this causes Gaia immense, unbearable physical agony. The earth is literally groaning under the pressure of her own imprisoned children.
And this is where the cycle of cosmic violence, which defines all of Greek myth, truly begins.
Right, because Gaia cannot take the pain anymore. She plots a rebellion.
She has to do something.
So she fashions a massive sickle out of unyielding gray flint, and she begs her Titan children to help her overthrow their father. But they are all too terrified. Except for one.
Cronus, the youngest and the shrewdest. He sees an opportunity for power.
So what does she do?
So Gaia sets an ambush. She hides Cronus in the shadows of her own valleys.
Just waiting for nightfall.
Exactly. When Uranus, the sky, descends at night to cover the earth and mate with her, Cronus springs from the shadows.
He strikes.
He takes that jagged flint sickle, grabs his father, and castrates him.
It is so visceral. There is no magical blast of light, no abstract magical duel.
None of that.
It is a son taking a rock and mutilating his father.
It is deeply visceral, and it has to be.
Yeah.
He severs the source of his father's generative power.
And then he throws it away, right?
Right, he throws the severed flesh into the sea. But in Greek myth, nothing of divine origin can simply vanish.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. The blood that drips from the wound hits the earth, and from that corrupted soil, we get the Furies.
The Furies are terrifying.
They're these relentless spirits of vengeance whose sole job in the cosmos is to hunt down people who murder their own family members.
We also get the giants, and strangely, the nymphs of the ash trees from that blood.
But the craziest part is what happens to the flesh that lands in the ocean.
Yeah, the sources describe the water foaming around it, reacting to this immense divine power.
And out of that bloody sea foam steps Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire.
It is the ultimate paradox of the Greek worldview. Aphrodite is completely untouched by the extreme violence of her own creation. She is pure allure.
It is fascinating.
The Greeks are telling us right here at the beginning of their story that love and beauty are born directly from bloodshed, rebellion, and deep trauma.
That is such a profound way to look at it. Yeah. So Uranus retreats, his power broken, and Cronus takes the throne of the cosmos.
He wins.
He marries his sister Rhea, and he initiates what later poets would call the Golden Age.
But there is a massive catch.
Always a catch.
As Uranus was bleeding and fleeing, he cursed Cronus. He said, "Just as I was overthrown by my own son, so too shall you be overthrown by yours."
And Cronus lets that prophecy just fester in his mind until he becomes completely paranoid.
He ends up repeating the exact same sins as his father, just in a different way.
It is the cycle of generational trauma on a cosmic scale.
Literally.
Every time Rhea gives birth to one of their children, who will become the famous Olympian gods like Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon.
What does he do?
Cronus doesn't lock them in the earth. He takes the newborn baby and he swallows it whole.
Oh my God.
He eats his own children alive to thwart the prophecy, trapping them in his own stomach.
It is a horrifying nightmare image. A father swallowing his infants to maintain political power.
It really is.
But I want to pause the mythology for a second and map this onto the actual history of the region.
Well, this is the best part.
Because while these myths were being passed down orally over centuries, there were real civilizations rising, falling, and leaving ruins in the Aegean Sea.
Yes, there were.
Long before the classical Greece we know, the one with Socrates and the Parthenon, during the Bronze Age, there was a completely different civilization. Historians call them the Minoans.
Yes, the Minoans. They lived primarily on the island of Crete, roughly from 2700 to 1450 BC.
Which is incredibly old.
To put that in perspective, they are as ancient to the classical Greeks as the Roman Empire is to us today.
And the Minoans are absolutely wild to read about because they were shockingly advanced.
Very advanced.
They built these massive, sprawling palace complexes, the most famous being Knossos on Crete.
Yeah.
We are not talking about stone huts.
Wow, far from it.
We are talking about multi-story palaces with running water, advanced terracotta plumbing, flushing toilets, skylights for natural illumination, and buried sewer lines.
It is mind-blowing. They were a thalassocracy, meaning a maritime empire. They controlled the sea trade across the Mediterranean, and they operated on what historians call a redistribution economy.
Let me stop you there. What exactly does a redistribution economy look like in 2000 BC? How does that actually work without computers or modern banking?
Imagine the palace at Knossos, like an ancient, highly localized Amazon fulfillment center.
Okay, I like that analogy.
If you were a farmer growing olives or wheat, you didn't just take your cart to a local market and haggle for shoes. You brought all your surplus grain, all your olive oil, all your wine directly to the central palace.
You gave it all to the king.
The palace administrators would log everything you brought in using their written language, which we call linear A. They would store it in these massive underground clay jars.
And then what?
And then the palace would redistribute those goods back out to the populace based on need, status, or labor provided. They paid craftsmen, soldiers, and builders from this centralized stockpile.
It was a massive, highly centralized machine of administration.
Exactly. And they managed all of this with linear A, which, by the way, we still haven't deciphered.
It is so frustrating.
We have their tablets, we can see they're counting things, but we don't actually know the language they spoke.
But what we do have is their art, which tells a very different story from the Greece that comes later.
Their art is mesmerizing. Unlike later Greek art, which is obsessed with bearded men fighting wars or muscular heroes killing monsters, Minoan frescoes prominently feature women.
Really prominently.
You see women leading sacrifices, priestesses in these incredibly ornate, flounced dresses with exposed breasts, commanding religious ceremonies.
And they have that bull leaping stuff, too.
Yes, you see young men and women leaping over the backs of charging bulls in some sort of dangerous ritual sport.
It suggests a society that might have been highly egalitarian, or perhaps even matriarchal, which is a stark, absolute contrast to the deeply, rigidly patriarchal Greek society that follows them.
It really makes you wonder what their culture was actually like.
So, when I was reading the sources, this thought hit me. To the later Greeks, the ones living centuries after the Minoans disappeared, the Minoans were essentially the Titans.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. The later Greeks are walking around in the Iron Age. They find these massive ruined palaces on Crete. Did they look at that and think, oh, this must be where the gods or the old giants lived?
That is a very solid theory.
I mean, think about Knossos. The palace was this sprawling, confusing complex of hundreds of unlit rooms, corridors, and basements. Is the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth literally just the later Greeks stumbling through the ruins of Knossos?
Just trying to make sense of these endless winding rooms and staring at faded frescoes of people jumping over bulls.
Exactly.
That is precisely what most modern historians and archaeologists believe.
It just clicks so perfectly.
The classical Greece had no concept of archaeology. They couldn't radiocarbon date a wall. They saw these cyclopean ruins, walls made of stone so massive, they genuinely believed only one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes, could have moved them.
Because they couldn't fathom humans doing it.
Right, they had to explain them. They created stories to explain the ghosts of the landscape. And the Minoan civilization eventually collapsed in a horrifying way.
Right, there's a natural disaster.
We know there was a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, sometime around 1600 BC.
And it was catastrophic.
It triggered massive tsunamis that wiped out the Minoan fleets and covered their fields in volcanic ash. They were fatally weakened, and they were supplanted by a mainland, more warlike civilization.
The Mycenaeans.
The Mycenaeans.
Right, the Mycenaeans operate from about 1600 to 1100 BC. They are the ones who build massive walled citadels on the Greek mainland, like Mycenae and Tiryns.
And they take the unreadable Minoan script, Linear A, and they adapt it to write their own language.
Which creates Linear B.
Yes, which is an early, archaic form of Greek.
And what is crazy to me is that in these incredibly boring Mycenaean warehouse accounting logs, literally tablets saying we owe 3 jars of oil to the priest, we see the names of the Olympian gods.
It is amazing to see that written down so early.
Poseidon, Athena, Dionysus. They are already being worshipped 3,500 years ago.
Exactly. The transition in the mythology from the old, strange, matriarchal Titans to the structured, patriarchal Olympians mirrors the actual transition of power in the Aegean world from the Minoans to the Mycenaeans.
Which brings us perfectly back to the myth and to Rhea, who is sick and tired of her husband Cronus eating her babies.
Right. Rhea is pregnant with her 6th child, Zeus.
And she knows what is coming.
She knows Cronus is going to eat this one too. So she flees to the island of Crete, which, interestingly, is the home of the Minoans, and she gives birth to Zeus in a hidden cave on Mount Ida.
She pulls a fast one on Cronus.
She really does.
She takes a large, smooth rock, wraps it in baby swaddling clothes, and hands it to her husband.
And Cronus, in his paranoid haste, just unhinges his jaw and swallows the rock whole without even checking.
He doesn't even chew, just swallows it.
Nope. So Zeus is raised in secret in this cave, nursed by a magical goat named Amalthea.
And when he reaches adulthood, he returns to Cronus's court in disguise as a cupbearer.
He slips a magical emetic potion into Cronus's wine.
A potion to make him throw up.
Exactly. The potion forces Cronus to violently vomit up the stone, and then, one by one, he vomits up the 5 siblings he had eaten.
Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon.
And because they are immortal gods, they haven't been digested. They've been growing inside him, and they emerge fully grown and ready for war.
And this ignites the Titanomachy, the Clash of the Titans.
The big one.
This isn't a skirmish. It is a 10-year cosmic war that literally tears the universe apart. You have the older generation of Titans stationed on Mount Othrys, and the younger generation, the Olympians, stationed on Mount Olympus.
The ancient poets describe this war in apocalyptic terms. Forests are catching fire, the oceans are boiling, the sky is screaming.
But for 10 years, it is a dead stalemate.
The Titans are just too powerful.
The tide only turns when Zeus takes the advice of Gaia. He descends into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, and he frees the monsters that Uranus had locked away ages ago.
The Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires?
And the Cyclops are so grateful to be freed from the dark that they use their cosmic blacksmithing skills to forge weapons for the three brothers.
This is where we get the iconic gear.
Yes. They give Zeus his signature weapon, the Thunderbolt. They give Poseidon his earth-shattering trident. And they give Hades a helm of darkness, which makes the wearer invisible.
Armed with these divine weapons of mass destruction and backed by the Hecatoncheires, who are using their 100 arms to hurl literal mountains at the Titan stronghold.
They just overwhelm them.
They finally break the stalemate. The Titans are defeated, bound in unbreakable chains, and hurled down into Tartarus, guarded forever by the 100-handed giants.
Okay, so the old regime is gone, the universe is in ruins, but the Olympians have won. Now, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, have to figure out who is in charge.
That is a tricky situation.
It is, but they don't do it by fighting each other. I always wondered about this. Why didn't Zeus just use the thunderbolt to vaporize his brothers and take it all?
Because that would just be a continuation of the chaos of Uranus and Cronus. Zeus represents a shift toward order, laws, and structure.
You want stability.
So they leave it to a force older than themselves. Fate. They cast lots. They draw straws from a helmet.
And how does it shake out?
Zeus draws the sky, making him the supreme king. Poseidon draws the sea, becoming the lord of earthquakes and oceans. And Hades draws the shortest straw. He gets the underworld, the realm of the dead.
What about the earth?
The earth itself and Mount Olympus is left as common ground where all gods can interact.
And this establishes the Olympian court. If you think about it, it's essentially a cosmic corporate boardroom.
That is a great way to describe it.
You've got Zeus as the CEO, holding the ultimate veto power with his lightning. Hera is the queen, overseeing marriage and childbirth, but she is most famous in the myths for her brutal, relentless vengeance against Zeus's many, many infidelities.
Very true.
Demeter controls the harvest, which is literally the lifeblood of an agricultural society. Estia tends the hearth fire, representing the home and the city center.
Then you have the next generation, mostly the children of Zeus, who represent the specific facets of human civilization.
Right.
You have Athena, who wasn't born in a normal way. Zeus swallowed her pregnant mother, Metis, out of fear of a prophecy.
Just like his dad.
Yes. Zeus gets a splitting headache, Hephaestus splits his skull open with an axe, and Athena springs out fully formed, wearing battle armor, shouting a war cry.
Incredible imagery.
She represents wisdom, statecraft, and the strategic, disciplined aspect of warfare.
Which is the total opposite of Ares, the god of war.
Exactly. Ares is the brutal, chaotic, blood-soaked reality of the battlefield. The Greeks actually didn't like Ares very much.
Really? I feel like modern media loves him.
They respected him out of fear, but they preferred Athena's calculated strategy.
Then you have Apollo, the golden god of light, music, reason, and prophecy. His twin sister Artemis, the fiercely independent goddess of the hunt, wild animals, and the moon.
Don't forget Hephaestus, the blacksmith god of the forge. He is the only Olympian described as physically imperfect. Right. He walks with a severe limp because he was thrown off Mount Olympus.
Yet this outcast creates the most beautiful, perfect, mechanical wonders in the universe. And Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the god of borders, thieves, and the one who guides dead souls down to Hades.
It is a complete, functioning societal structure projected into the heavens. The Greeks created a pantheon that mirrored a highly functional, if entirely dysfunctional, royal family.
It is basically ancient reality TV.
Pretty much. But while the gods are busy getting their golden house in order, humanity finally comes into the picture. And the Greek view of human origins is remarkably, depressingly bleak.
Yeah, we aren't made in a lush garden of paradise. A titan who fought on Zeus's side named Prometheus, whose name literally translates to forethought, shapes humans out of mud and water.
But we are absolutely pathetic.
We really are. We are naked. We have no claws to fight with, no thick fur to keep us warm in winter, no fangs, no wings. We are basically just slow, soft targets for all the monsters roaming the earth.
Prometheus loves his creation, and he feels terrible for us. We are shivering in caves, eating raw meat, terrified of the dark.
So he decides to commit the ultimate cosmic theft.
He sneaks up to Mount Olympus, steals fire from Hephaestus's forge, hides a glowing ember inside the hollow stalk of a fennel plant, and smuggles it down to humanity.
But why fire? I mean, why not give us thick skin or sharp teeth?
Because fire isn't just about being warm. To a Bronze Age Greek, fire is the singular dividing line between an animal and a god.
Oh, that makes sense.
Fire allows you to cook meat, which provides the calories needed to grow larger human brains. Fire allows you to harden clay into bricks to build cities. Fire allows you to smelt copper and tin into bronze to make swords and plows.
Fire is technology.
Fire is civilization itself. By giving us fire, Prometheus didn't just warm us up. He made us a threat to the gods.
And Zeus is absolutely furious. Fire was the strict guarded privilege of the divine. To punish Prometheus for this treason, Zeus chains him to a jagged crag in the Caucasus Mountains.
The punishment is so brutal.
Every single day, a giant eagle swoops down, tears open Prometheus's abdomen, and eats his liver. Because he's an immortal titan, he doesn't die.
Right.
During the freezing night, his flesh heals and his liver regenerates, only for the eagle to return at dawn to do it all over again. The torture is eternal.
But Zeus doesn't stop with the architect of the crime. He turns his wrath on the beneficiaries. He decides humanity needs to be punished for accepting the fire.
Right. So he orders Hephaestus to create a trap. He crafts the first woman out of earth and water. Her name is Pandora, which translates to all gifted.
The gods give her beauty, persuasion, and cunning, and they give her a sealed vessel.
Now, I have to point out, because the sources are very explicit about this, it was a jar. A large clay storage jar called a pithos. It was absolutely not a box.
That is a huge misconception.
A monk named Erasmus made a translation error centuries later, confusing pithos, which means jar, with pieces, which means box, and ruined the visual forever.
A pinos was the kind of jar the Greeks used to bury their dead or store grain. So Pandora is given this jar and strictly warned by Zeus never ever to open it.
But Zeus is cruel.
He purposefully had the gods endow her with an insatiable, burning curiosity. She is dropped onto the earth, she looks at the jar, and eventually the curiosity breaks her. She pries the heavy clay lid off.
And outflies every single evil that plagues the human condition today. Disease, toil, grief, madness, famine, envy.
They swarm out like a black cloud of insects and scatter across the globe.
Terrified, she slams the lid back on. But it's too late. The jar is empty, save for one tiny, fluttering thing caught trapped under the lid at the very bottom. Hope.
The inclusion of hope is endlessly debated by philosophers.
Why is that?
Is hope a comfort to humanity, giving us the strength to endure the diseases that just flew out? Or, as some ancient thinkers argued, is hope actually the greatest evil of all, because it prolongs our suffering by tricking us into thinking tomorrow might be better?
Wow, that is a dark way to look at it.
It really is.
But it fits the Greek mindset perfectly. Which leads us into how the Greeks viewed the progression of human history. Because they didn't believe in a steady march of progress where things get better every century.
They believe the exact opposite.
The poet Hesiod breaks it down into the ages of man.
Yes. Hesiod outlines a steady, depressing decline. It starts with the Golden Age, back when Cronus ruled. Humans were made of gold.
Sounds nice.
It was peaceful. The earth just gave food without farming. No one aged. And when people died, they just fell asleep and became benevolent guardian spirits.
Then you get the Silver Age. These people took 100 years to grow up, but they were arrogant, they refused to sacrifice to the gods, so an annoyed Zeus wiped them out.
Then the Bronze Age. These humans were terrifying.
They were born from trees, right.
Hesiod says they were born from the ash trees, the same trees that grew from the blood of Uranus. They were obsessed with violence. They wore bronze armor, lived in bronze houses, only cared about war, and eventually they were so violent they just slaughtered each other into complete extinction.
Then there is a brief blip of glory, the heroic age. This is the era of the demigods. The warriors who fought at Troy and Thebes, the men who sailed with Jason.
And finally, Hesiod's own era, the one the Greeks were actually living in, which he calls the Iron Age.
The worst one.
He describes it as a time of bitter, unending toil, sorrow, broken oaths, and moral decay, where justice and shame have packed their bags and fled the earth to return to Olympus.
So wait, why would a culture invent a mythology that says, everything used to be awesome and now we are the worst, most miserable version of humanity to ever exist?
It was an incredible coping mechanism.
Oh, so.
Think about the landscape they were living in. A Greek farmer in 700 BC is breaking his back, plowing rocky soil. He looks up on the hill and sees the Cyclopean, massive, ruined walls of Mycenae.
And he knows he didn't build that.
He knows he can't build that. He doesn't have the technology. The ruins prove to him that greater, stronger men used to walk the earth. Hesiod's Ages of Man provided a framework to explain those massive ruins and to rationalize the inherent, grinding hardship of an agricultural life where a single bad winter meant your family starved.
It makes sense of the suffering.
If you believe you're living in the Iron Age, suffering isn't an accident. It's just the structural reality of the era you were born into.
If the Iron Age was about grinding survival, let's look back at that blip of glory, the heroic age. Because the gods didn't just stay on Mount Olympus playing corporate politics.
No, they were very involved.
They constantly came down to Earth, mingled with mortals, often non-consensually, and created demigod children. These heroes had to bridge the terrifying gap between the divine world and the mundane world.
And when we talk about heroes, we had to start with Perseus. He is the foundational hero.
Reading his story, it feels like the absolute blueprint for every hero's journey ever written.
It truly is. It has the prophecy, the magical birth, the impossible quest, and the divine intervention.
So how does it start?
Perseus's grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, goes to the oracle and gets a terrifying prophecy. Your daughter will have a son, and that son will kill you.
A classic Greek prophecy.
Acrisius wants to avoid this fate, but he's afraid to murder his own daughter Danae because the Furies would hunt him down. So he locks her in a windowless bronze tower, sealing her away from all men.
But you can't lock out Zeus.
Never.
Zeus sees Danae, turns himself into a shower of golden rain, seeps through the cracks in the bronze roof, and Perseus is conceived.
The king discovers the baby, panics, nails them both inside a wooden chest, and throws them into the churning sea, hoping Poseidon will do the dirty work of killing them.
But they survive. They wash up on the island of Seriphos. A kind fisherman raises Perseus, but the fisherman's brother is the cruel king of the island, Polydectes.
And Polydectes wants to force Danae to marry him, but Perseus is fiercely protective of his mother.
So the king manipulates Perseus into boasting and challenges him to bring back the ultimate trophy, the head of Medusa.
Which is a suicide mission. Medusa is a gorgon. She has snakes for hair, and if you look directly into her eyes, you are instantly turned into solid stone.
But because Perseus is a son of Zeus, the gods intervene. Athena gives him a highly polished bronze shield to act as a mirror. Hermes gives him a sword of adamantine and winged sandals to fly. Hades lends him the helm of invisibility.
He is totally decked out in divine gear.
Perseus uses the shield to look only at Medusa's reflection. He creeps into her lair while she's sleeping, and he decapitates her.
He puts the head in a magic bag, and on the way home, he spots the princess Andromeda chained to a rock about to be eaten by a sea monster.
He saves her, takes her back to Seriphos, pulls out Medusa's head, and turns the evil king and all his courtiers into a courtyard of stone statues. He saves his mother.
But remember the prophecy.
Right, he can't outrun that.
Years later, Perseus is competing in athletic games in a neighboring city. He throws a heavy bronze discus. The wind catches it, it veers into the crowd, and strikes an old man in the head, killing him instantly.
That old man was King Acrisius, his grandfather, who had fled his own kingdom, trying to hide from Perseus.
The lesson there is clear. Prophecies in Greek myth have a 100% success rate. Trying to outrun fate is the exact mechanism fate uses to catch you.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy every time.
Exactly. But as famous as Perseus is, his great-grandson is the undisputed ultimate hero of this age, Heracles.
Or Hercules in the Roman tradition.
Yes.
But reading his actual mythological sources, his story is definitely not the upbeat Disney movie. It is defined from day one by unimaginable, grueling suffering.
Absolutely. Heracles is the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene. This means Hera, Zeus's wife, despises him with a cosmic burning passion from the moment he takes his first breath.
She wants him dead immediately.
She sends 2 massive serpents to strangle him in his crib when he is just a baby. Heracles, displaying his divine strength, just grabs them by the necks and strangles them to death while laughing.
Baby things.
Right. But Hera is a goddess. She plays the long game. She waits until Heracles is a grown man, a great hero, happily married to his wife Megara, with beautiful children.
And then she strikes. She inflicts Heracles with a fit of divine madness. In this blinding hallucination, he believes his children are actually the children of his enemy, and he brutally murders his entire family.
It's so dark.
When the madness lifts and he realizes what his own hands have done, the grief is absolute. He wants to die.
To atone for the blood guilt, the Oracle of Delphi tells him he must bind himself in servitude to his cowardly, weak cousin, King Eurystheus, and perform whatever labors the king demands.
And these 12 labors aren't just difficult chores, they are impossible, suicidal missions against primeval nightmare creatures that represent the untamed, hostile wilderness of the Bronze Age Mediterranean.
Let's talk about the mechanics of some of these labors, because he doesn't just hit things with a club.
Right, he has to be smart too.
First, he has to kill the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden fur is completely impervious to bronze, iron, or stone. Arrows just bounce off it.
So Heracles realizes weapons are useless. He corners it in a cave, wrestles it barehanded, and chokes it to death. He then uses the lion's own razor-sharp claws to skin it and wears the pelt as impenetrable armor.
Then he faces the Lernaean Hydra, a massive water serpent with 9 heads living in a toxic swamp.
This one is tricky.
Every time Heracles hacks off a head with his sword, 2 more instantly grow back from the bloody stump. The monster is literally weaponizing his own strength against him.
So he needs help.
He has his nephew Iolaus stand by with a burning torch. As soon as Heracles cuts off a head, Iolaus sears the neck stump with fire, cauterizing the wound so nothing can grow back.
Now, you mentioned earlier about reading the history through the myth. Is there a practical explanation for the Hydra?
Absolutely. The swamps of Lerna were real, and they were breeding grounds for malarial mosquitoes. The disease would kill people seemingly endlessly.
Like heads growing back.
To the ancient Greeks, Heracles slaying the Hydra with fire and earth might represent early human efforts to drain the swamps, burn the brush, and make the land habitable. The hero is the civilizing force conquering the deadly chaos of nature.
That makes perfect sense. Like the Augean stables, his labor is to clean a stable holding immortal livestock that hasn't been mucked out in 30 years. It's a mountain of disease and filth.
Instead of shoveling it, he uses engineering. He tears holes in the walls of the stable, reroutes 2 massive rivers, and lets the rushing water blast the filth away in a single day.
He travels to the edges of the known earth. He retrieves the golden apples of the Hesperides by tricking the Titan Atlas, the guy who literally holds the sky on his shoulders.
Heracles holds the sky for him, lets Atlas get the apples, and then tricks him into taking the sky back.
His final 12th labor takes him to the absolute limit of mortality. He descends into the underworld, wrestles Cerberus, the 3-headed demon dog of Hades, into submission without weapons, and drags it to the surface to prove he has conquered death itself.
He completes the labors, he achieves redemption, but his life doesn't end with a peaceful retirement.
It really doesn't.
He marries a woman named Deianira. A centaur named Nessus tries to assault her, so Heracles shoots the centaur with an arrow dipped in the toxic acidic blood of the Hydra.
And the centaur plays a trick.
As the centaur is dying, he lies to Deianira. He tells her, "Take my blood. If Heracles ever stops loving you, soak his shirt in my blood, and it will act as a love potion."
Years later, she gets jealous and uses the blood, not realizing it is contaminated with the Hydra venom. Heracles puts the shirt on and the venom activates.
It binds to his skin and begins burning him alive.
The pain is so excruciating, and because he's a demigod, he can't easily die, that he builds his own massive funeral pyre on a mountain. He lies down on it and begs his friends to light it on fire just to end the agony.
The flames consume his mortal half, and Zeus, finally moved by his son's unmatched endurance, reaches down and pulls his immortal soul up to Mount Olympus to become a god.
It is the ultimate story of raw endurance. You suffer, you conquer, you burn, you ascend. But not all heroes get that apotheosis. Look at Jason.
Jason is a very different kind of hero.
He leads the Argonauts on the ship Argo to find the Golden Fleece. Jason isn't super strong, he's charismatic and ambitious.
Jason's story is fundamentally a tragedy of ambition and betrayal. He only survives his impossible quest because the foreign sorceress Medea falls in love with him.
She does everything for him.
She betrays her own family, uses dark magic to help him steal the fleece, and chops up her own brother to delay their pursuers. Jason promises to love her forever.
But once he gets back to Greece and wants political legitimacy, he abandons Medea to marry a younger Greek princess.
And Medea's revenge is arguably the darkest moment in all of Greek theater. To inflict the maximum possible pain on Jason, she doesn't just kill his new bride. She murders her own children, the sons she had with Jason.
Jason is left with absolutely nothing. He loses his kingdom, his family, his glory. He ends up decades later as an old, broken, homeless man, sleeping under the rotting hull of his old ship, the Argo.
The prow of the ship rots, snaps off, and falls on his head, killing him in his sleep.
It's a stark warning about hubris and breaking oaths. And we cannot talk about tragedy and fate without discussing Oedipus, the king of Thebes.
If there's one myth that perfectly encapsulates the Greek terror of inescapable destiny, it is this one.
The parents of Oedipus, the king and queen of Thebes, receive a prophecy from Delphi. Your newborn son will grow up to murder his father and sleep with his mother.
Horrified, they pin the baby's ankles together and order a shepherd to leave him on a desolate mountain to die of exposure.
But the shepherd takes pity on the baby and gives him to another shepherd from the city of Corinth.
Oedipus is raised by the king and queen of Corinth, believing they are his biological parents. When he's a young man, he hears a rumor about the prophecy.
He goes to the oracle, and the oracle confirms it. You will kill your father and marry your mother.
Terrified, Oedipus does what any rational person would do. He flees Corinth forever, vowing never to return, specifically to avoid harming the people he thinks are his parents.
Which puts him right on the highway leading straight to Thebes. He gets to a narrow crossroads. A chariot comes the other way.
The arrogant old man in the chariot refuses to yield, whips Oedipus, and Oedipus gets road rage.
He pulls him down and kills the old man and his guards. He doesn't know it, but he just murdered his biological father, King Laius.
He continues to Thebes, which is being terrorized by the Sphinx. He solves her riddle, frees the city, and as a reward, the grateful citizens make him their new king and give him the hand of their recently widowed queen, Jocasta.
His biological mother. By running as fast as he could away from his fate, every single step he took was a step toward fulfilling it.
It is brilliant, devastating storytelling.
He rules well for years, has 4 children with Jocasta. When a plague hits Thebes, he aggressively investigates the old king's murder to cleanse the city. He acts as the detective, aggressively pulling on threads, interrogating witnesses, until the horrifying truth unravels.
When Jocasta realizes what has happened, she hangs herself in her bedroom. Oedipus finds her body, takes the golden pins from her dress, and repeatedly stabs himself in the eyes.
Blinding himself so he will never have to look upon his children, his parents in the underworld, or the city he ruined. It is the ultimate expression of the tragic flaw. Humans are blind to the massive machinery of fate until it crushes them.
It really is the perfect tragedy.
But here is where it gets really interesting for the historical angle. Let's look at Theseus, the great hero of Athens. If you compare Theseus to Heracles, you see a massive shift in how the Greeks were thinking about society.
Yes, Theseus's early career sounds a lot like Heracles. He travels the coastal road to Athens, and he clears it of all these bizarre serial killers.
And villains like Procrustes, who would invite travelers to sleep in his iron bed. If they were too short, he would stretch them on a rack until their joints popped. If they were too tall, he would chop off their feet to make them fit.
Theseus gives these killers a taste of their own medicine, dispensing a brutal eye for an eye justice.
He goes to Crete, navigates the pitch-black labyrinth, and kills the Minotaur using a ball of string given to him by the Minoan princess Ariadne so he can find his way out.
But you can't build a complex civilization on guys who just smash things with clubs, and that's where Theseus is different.
Exactly. The distinction is crucial. Heracles is a wandering loner, an outcast from society solving problems with sheer primeval violence. But Theseus becomes the king of Athens.
He is a political unifier. The mythology explicitly credits Theseus with the synokismos.
The bringing together of the scattered, warring villages of Attica into a single, unified political entity centered on Athens. He establishes the first laws. He institutes democratic assemblies. He creates civic festivals.
And as the sources point out, this perfectly matches the historical archaic period, around 800 to 500 BC.
Right.
The Greeks were emerging from the Dark Ages. They were developing the polis, the city-state concept. They were moving away from tribal warlords to structured civic life.
Theseus represents that necessary shift. He is the transition from the rugged, violent individual to the collective strength of civic unity, diplomacy, and the rule of law.
The mythology adapts. It morphs to reflect the changing political reality of the people telling the stories.
And nowhere is the blending of myth, memory, and harsh reality more powerful than in the defining event of the Greek consciousness, the Trojan War.
The absolute epic climax of the mythological age.
And it is so darkly funny to me that a war that burns cities and destroys empires starts with a petty dispute at a wedding.
It starts with the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph. Everyone who is anyone on Olympus is invited, except for one goddess, Eris, the personification of discord and strife.
Naturally, you don't want strife at a wedding, but she takes offense. She shows up at the banquet hall and rolls a solid gold apple across the floor. Inscribed on the apple are 3 words, "To the fairest."
And immediately, the 3 most powerful goddesses in the room, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, dive for it. They all claim it. They demand Zeus choose who is the most beautiful.
Zeus, who isn't stupid, knows that picking one means making enemies of the other 2 forever.
Right, he doesn't want any part of that.
So he delegates. He tells Hermes to take them to a mortal, a handsome Trojan prince named Paris, who is currently acting as a shepherd on Mount Ida, and let him judge.
The goddesses appear before Paris, and they don't play fair. They immediately resort to massive geopolitical bribes.
Hera offers to make him the supreme king of all Europe and Asia. Athena offers him unmatched skill in battle and strategy.
But Aphrodite taps into his desires. She offers him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman on earth.
Paris, thinking with his hormones, chooses Aphrodite. He hands her the apple. The problem is, the most beautiful woman on earth is Helen, and she is already married to Menelaus, the fiercely proud king of Sparta.
Paris sails to Sparta as a diplomatic guest. Under the laws of Xenia, the sacred, unbreakable Greek code of guest-host hospitality, Menelaus treats him like a brother.
But Paris violates that sacred code. With Aphrodite's help, he either seduces or violently abducts Helen and steals a massive portion of the Spartan treasury to boot. He sails back to the walled city of Troy.
Menelaus is furious. He goes to his brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae, and they call in a pact.
Years earlier, all the kings of Greece had sworn a sacred oath to defend Helen's eventual husband. So Agamemnon calls the banners. They assemble the greatest armada the world has ever seen. 1,000 ships gather at the port of Aulis.
But there's a problem. The winds completely die. The fleet sits there for weeks, rotting on the beach, troops getting restless.
A seer reveals the terrible truth. Agamemnon had offended Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, by killing one of her sacred deer and boasting about it. Artemis has stopped the winds.
And her price to release them is unimaginable. She demands that Agamemnon sacrifice his own eldest daughter, the young princess Iphigenia, on a bloody altar.
This is one of the most sickening moments in the myth. Agamemnon is the commander of the Greeks. If he backs down, he loses his coalition, his honor, and his power.
So he sends a letter to his wife, Clytemnestra, lying to her. He says, "Send our daughter to Aulis. I have arranged for her to marry the great warrior Achilles."
The mother and daughter arrive dressed for a wedding. Instead, Agamemnon has his men gag his daughter so she can't curse him, hoists her onto an altar, and slits her throat like a goat.
He murders his own child for favorable winds and political ambition. It is a profound, horrifying act that taints the entire Greek expedition before they even leave the shore. It sets the tone for the absolute moral degradation of the 10-year war.
The fleet sails. They land at Troy, and a brutal, grinding siege begins. And what surprises a lot of people is that Homer's epic, the Iliad, doesn't cover the whole 10-year war.
It doesn't have the golden apple, and it doesn't have the Trojan horse.
It focuses tightly on just a few weeks in the 9th year of the war, and the entire theme of the Iliad is established in its very first word, Menon, wrath.
The all-consuming, world-destroying rage of the greatest Greek warrior, Achilles.
Agamemnon and Achilles get into a bitter, prideful dispute over war prizes, specifically enslaved women. Agamemnon pulls rank and publicly insults Achilles.
Achilles, whose pride is colossal, refuses to fight. He takes his men, sits by his ships, and basically says, "Let's see how well you do without me."
And without Achilles, the Greeks start getting slaughtered. The Trojans, led by their noble prince Hector, push the Greeks all the way back to their ships and start setting them on fire.
Achilles still refuses to fight. But his closest companion, Patroclus, begs to borrow Achilles' iconic armor to rally the troops and scare the Trojans back.
Achilles agrees, but warns him not to push too far. Patroclus pushes too far. He is killed by Hector.
When Achilles gets the news, the grief breaks his mind. His pride vanishes, replaced by a psychotic genocidal rage. He gets new armor forged by the gods, and he goes on a rampage that is so violent, he literally fights the river god of the Scamander because he is choking the waters with so many Trojan corpses.
He finds Hector. Hector realizes he's outmatched and runs, but Achilles chases him down and drives a spear through his neck.
But killing him isn't enough.
Achilles pierces Hector's ankles, threads leather straps through them, ties the corpse to the back of his chariot, and drags Hector's body through the dirt around the walls of Troy for days, right in front of Hector's screaming wife and parents. He completely loses his humanity.
The Iliad only finds its resolution in a moment of profound shared grief. King Priam of Troy, an old, broken man, sneaks through enemy lines into the Greek camp at night.
He enters Achilles' tent, falls to his knees, and kisses the hands of the man who murdered his sons. He begs Achilles to remember his own aging father and to return Hector's body for proper burial.
Achilles breaks down. The two enemies weep together over the tragedy of the war. Achilles returns the body, restoring a sliver of humanity to a decade of butchery.
But the war itself doesn't end there. It ends with the Trojan horse. The city of Troy has massive, impregnable walls. The Greeks realize force won't work, so Odysseus, the master of trickery, devises a plan.
They build a massive wooden horse, hide a strike force inside its hollow belly, warm their own camp, and pretend to sail away in defeat, leaving the horse as an offering to Athena.
The Trojans, believing the war is over, drag the massive horse inside their gates to celebrate. They drink, they feast, and they fall asleep.
In the dead of night, the Greek fleet sails back. The strike force drops out of the horse's belly, slaughters the sentries, and throws open the massive gates.
And what follows is a complete atrocity. The Greeks don't just win, they absolutely butcher the city. They pull old King Priam away from a sacred altar and murder him.
They throw Hector's infant son off the walls of the city to end the royal bloodline. They drag priestesses from the temples.
They commit such horrific sacrilege that the gods who had supported them turn away in disgust.
Because of their hubris and cruelty during the sack of Troy, the gods curse the Greek fleet. The Nostoi, the epic stories of the Greeks returning home, are universally tragic.
Agamemnon makes it back to Mycenae, walks into his palace, steps into a warm bath, and is hacked to death with an axe by his wife Clytemnestra, who never, ever forgave him for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia.
And Odysseus. He wanders the oceans for another 10 agonizing years. He faces the blinding of the Cyclops Polyphemus, the hypnotic deadly song of the Sirens, the monstrous Scylla, and the whirlpool Charybdis.
He loses every single ship and every single man under his command. He washes up on the shores of Ithaca alone, disguised as a beggar, only to find his palace overrun by greedy suitors trying to force his wife Penelope to marry them, forcing him to slaughter them all to reclaim his home.
Okay, that is the sweeping, epic, terrifying mythology of the Trojan War. But we have to step out of the myth and look at the dirt. Because how does this apocalyptic narrative align with the actual history of the region?
I was hoping you'd bring this up.
It aligns with chilling, undeniable precision. Sometime around 1200 BC, the real Mediterranean world, the world of the Mycenaeans, the Hittites in Anatolia, the wealthy cities of the Levant, experienced an apocalyptic systems collapse.
Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. Within a span of maybe 50 years, almost every major thriving, interconnected palace economy burned to the ground and was abandoned.
The massive Mycenaean citadels we talked about, Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos,
Gone, reduced to ash layers in the archaeological record. The complex international trade networks of copper and tin that made bronze possible completely dissolved.
and most devastatingly, the massive bureaucratic system we mentioned, Linear B, was lost. The scribes died, the palaces burned, and the Greeks quite literally forgot how to read and write.
Wait, how does a whole civilization just forget how to write?
Because literacy wasn't widespread, it was entirely controlled by a tiny, elite class of palace administrators. When the palace burned, the knowledge burned with it.
Historians still fiercely debate the exact causes of the collapse. It was likely a perfect storm. Systemic economic fragility, centuries of severe droughts causing famine, catastrophic earthquakes, and the arrival of mysterious, heavily armed maritime raiders the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples.
But the effect was a sudden, violent plunge into a dark age.
And here is where the overlap absolutely blows my mind. The Greeks living in that resulting dark age didn't have history books to tell them what happened. They didn't have graphs of crop failures.
They looked around at the charred, massive ruins of the palaces of their ancestors, and they processed the trauma of the collapse through storytelling.
They remembered the end of their golden world as a doomed, massive military expedition to a wealthy city called Troy.
The Trojan War myth is the cultural memory of the Bronze Age collapse. For 400 years, from roughly 1100 to 800 BC, during a time with no writing, the memory of the Bronze Age, the names of the old gods, the geography of the ruined kingdoms, and the tragic fall of the heroes were kept alive strictly through an unbroken chain of oral tradition.
I want you to really picture the mechanics of that. Imagine trying to rebuild the entire internet, all of our historical data, from memory. But you don't have hard drives. You only have rhyming songs passed down by your grandfathers sung around a fire.
The survival of your entire cultural identity depends on bards memorizing tens of thousands of lines of poetry, utilizing complex dactylic hexameter meter to ensure they don't forget the words, passing them down generation to generation.
It is a miraculous feat of human memory. Until finally, in the 8th century BC, the Greeks come into contact with the Phoenicians. They adapt the Phoenician alphabet to create the Greek alphabet, and writing is rediscovered.
At this point, a poet, or tradition of poets we call Homer, finally writes down the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Those poems aren't just entertaining stories, they become the ideological foundation of Greek identity. In the classical period, if you could read Homer, if you understood the wrath of Achilles and the cunning of Odysseus, you were Greek.
They provided a shared moral compass based on heroic excellence, which they called arete.
But we need to be careful here, because we've laid out this grand, epic mythology. We have Zeus throwing lightning and Achilles storming beaches. But what did it actually mean for a normal, everyday Greek farmer or potter to live with these gods?
When you dig into the sources on their religious practices, you quickly realize it wasn't about holding hands, singing hymns, and feeling spiritual warmth.
Not at all. The central pillar of Greek religion was orthopraxy. That means correct practice. It is the opposite of orthodoxy, which means correct belief.
Exactly. The Olympian gods generally did not care what was in your heart. They didn't care if you were feeling particularly faithful that morning. They cared that you performed the transaction correctly.
You sacrificed the right animal, unblemished, at the right altar, facing the right direction, saying the right words. It was a contractual relationship. Do I give so that you might give?
I give you the smoke of this thigh bone wrapped in fat, Zeus, and in return, you don't strike my house with lightning.
Wait, hold on. If they only care about the mechanics of a sacrifice and not what is in your heart, what is stopping society from falling into purge-style lawlessness? If I can cheat my business partner, lie to my neighbors, and murder a guy on the road, but I still sacrifice my goat on Tuesday, are the gods cool with it?
Excellent question. The gods absolutely cared about certain moral frameworks, but they were deeply tied to the survival of the community. Murder, incest, and oath-breaking created a physical, spiritual pollution called miasma.
If you had miasma, you infected your whole city, and the gods would send a plague to wipe out the city.
Therefore, morality was civic duty. You honored the gods by participating in the city's public festivals. You participated in the Panhellenic Games at Olympia, where peak athletic excellence, pushing the human body to its absolute limits, was offered as a physical tribute to Zeus.
And reading through the sources, you realize the religious landscape wasn't just these pristine marble Olympians in big temples. The local everyday folklore was wild. It was a rich, dark tapestry of bizarre superstitions. Like, a farmer in Arcadia wasn't worried about Poseidon sinking a warship. He was worried about the monsters in the dark.
Exactly. What kind of local folklore are the sources highlighting?
Oh, it is terrifying stuff. You had the Vrikolakas, which were these horrifying, vampire-like undead creatures that would rise from their graves if they weren't buried properly, knocking on doors and causing plagues.
You had the Kalikansaros, which were these malicious underground goblins that tried to chop down the world tree, but surfaced during the winter solstice to cause chaos in people's houses.
And female demons were particularly prominent in the folklore.
Yes, you had the Lamia, a monstrous woman who was said to devour children, the Mormo and the Jello, which were these spectral vampiric spirits that mothers used to frighten naughty children into behaving.
And even environmental ghosts, like the Drosselites, which were shadowy visions of phantom armies seen marching in the morning dew along the coasts of Crete.
The everyday Greek world was deeply superstitious, incredibly dangerous, and filled with things that went bump in the night.
Because the world itself was unpredictable. Disease could wipe out your family in a week. A storm could sink your trading ship and ruin you. Which brings us to the ultimate terrifying concept in Greek philosophy and religion: fate or Moira. Fate is the ultimate boss. Even Zeus, the supreme king of the cosmos who overthrew the Titans, was bound by the fates. They were three ancient sisters. Clotho spun the thread of a mortal's life on her spindle. Lachesis measured the length of that thread, determining how long you would live. And Atropos, the inflexible one, carried the shears.
When she cut your thread, you died. Period. Zeus could not stop the shears.
And because fate was completely inescapable, humans were obsessed with trying to glimpse it. They desperately sought out oracles. The most famous, the most powerful institution in the ancient world was the Oracle of Delphi.
This was a priestess known as the Pythia. She would sit on a tripod over a deep chasm in the earth, inhale sweet-smelling subterranean vapors, fall into a divine trance, and speak the cryptic will of Apollo.
And it wasn't just local farmers asking if it would rain. Kings, generals, and entire empires would travel for months, bringing treasuries full of gold, just to ask the Pythia a single question before launching a war or building a colony.
But this raises a really crucial question. If fate is sealed, if the thread is already measured, why ask an oracle at all? What's the point?
Imagine you are a modern CEO about to launch an incredibly risky multi-billion-dollar merger. Today, you hire a massive team of risk analysts and consultants to tell you what might happen. In 500 BC, you hiked up a mountain to ask a woman inhaling gas in a cave what to do.
Exactly. But they didn't seek prophecies to change their fate. They knew they couldn't. They sought them to face their destiny with preparation and dignity, to align their souls with the inevitable.
And the brilliant tragic irony of Greek myth is that the disaster almost always comes from the human arrogantly misinterpreting the prophecy.
King Croesus of Lydia is the best example. He is filthy rich, and he wants to expand his borders.
Yeah.
He asks the oracle at Delphi if he should attack the massive Persian Empire.
The Pythia gives him a classic double-edged prophecy. If you cross the river and attack, a great empire will be destroyed.
Croesus hears what he wants to hear. He thinks, awesome, I'm going to completely crush Persia. He gathers his army, crosses the river, attacks, loses catastrophically, and his own empire is completely destroyed.
The oracle was 100% correct. He just failed to read the fine print.
And when that thread was finally cut, whether in a glorious battle or quietly in your bed, where did you go? The Greek view of the afterlife was remarkably physical and geographically literal. Hades was not an abstract spiritual state. It was a physical subterranean realm beneath the earth.
The journey was a bureaucratic nightmare. First, you had to pay Charon, the skeletal, terrifying ferryman, to row your soul across the river Styx or the Acheron to get through the gates.
This is why the Greeks strictly buried their dead with a coin placed in the corpse's mouth so they could pay the toll. If you were unburied or broke, you wandered the shores as a miserable ghost for 100 years.
Once you crossed, the massive bronze gates were guarded by Cerberus, ensuring no living thing got in and no dead thing got out. And importantly, Hades was not heaven and hell. It was divided by the judges of the dead.
Right. For the vast, overwhelming majority of humanity, whether you were a reasonably good baker or a mildly annoying politician, you went to the plains of Asphodel.
It wasn't torture, but it wasn't a reward either. It was just a dim, gray, incredibly boring twilight shadow of your former life. You just drifted around aimlessly, forgetting who you were.
The truly exceptionally wicked, the oath breakers, the murderers of kin, the kings who defied the gods, were cast deep down into Tartarus. This was a prison of eternal, highly personalized, ironic punishment.
You have Sisyphus, who tried to cheat death, condemned to push a massive boulder up a steep hill, only for it to roll back down right as he reaches the top forever.
You have Tantalus, who killed his own son and tried to feed him to the gods, condemned to stand in a pool of clear water under a fruit tree. Whenever he reaches for a drink, the water drains away. Whenever he reaches for an apple, the wind blows the branch away. He is eternally tantalized.
And the truly great heroes, the chosen few favored by the gods, bypassed the gloom and went to Elysium, or the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise of eternal spring, sunlight, and athletic games.
And speaking of the cycle of spring in the underworld, we have to look at how the Greeks used the realm of the dead to explain the literal mechanics of the natural world. If the gods controlled this volatile Bronze Age landscape, how did the Greeks explain the death of their crops every single winter?
They didn't have meteorology, they had grief. And that brings us to the myth of Demeter and Persephone.
Hades, the lonely king of the underworld, erupts from the earth in a black chariot and violently abducts Persephone, the beautiful daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest.
Demeter's grief is so catastrophic, so all-consuming, that she completely abandons her duties. She wanders the earth weeping, and as a result, the crops die, the ground freezes, and humanity begins to starve to death.
Zeus realizes that if humanity starves, there will be no one left to sacrifice to the gods. So he intervenes and orders Hades to return the girl.
But Hades is clever. Before she leaves, he tricks Persephone into eating a few sweet crimson pomegranate seeds. In the laws of the Greek cosmos, if you consume the food of the underworld, you are bound to it forever.
So a divine compromise is struck. Because she ate a few seeds, Persephone has to spend a third of the year down in the dark as the queen of the underworld with Hades.
When she descends, Demeter mourns, the leaves fall, the cold winds blow, and we get autumn and winter. But when Persephone is allowed to return to the surface for the rest of the year, Demeter's joy is so boundless that the earth bursts into bloom, crops grow, and we get spring and summer.
It is a beautiful, deeply poignant way to explain the cyclical death and rebirth of the agricultural year. But Persephone's story becomes the center of something revolutionary that happens late in Greek religion: the rise of mystery cults.
What exactly made them mysteries?
Because unlike the civic religion, where you sacrifice a goat in the middle of the town square for everyone to see, these cults were strictly secret. You had to be initiated. The most famous were the Eleusinian mysteries, centered on Demeter and Persephone, and the cults dedicated to Dionysus.
Dionysus is such a fascinating, disruptive figure. He is the god of wine, of theater, of wild nature, and of ritual madness. He is an outsider god.
He was born twice, once ripped from the womb of his mortal mother, Semele, when she was incinerated by Zeus's true form and then sewn into Zeus's thigh to finish gestating.
He wanders the fringes of the known world, followed by Maenads, women driven into ecstatic, violent frenzies.
His worship didn't involve standing quietly at an altar. It involved heading into the dark mountains at night, drinking heavily, ecstatic dancing, tearing live animals apart with your bare hands, and completely breaking down the rigid social barriers of the Greek polis.
But more importantly, cults like his offered something the distant Olympians never did: personal salvation.
Right. The civic gods cared about the city's survival. The mystery cults offered a direct, emotional, terrifying connection to the divine. They promised their initiates that death was not just the gray, boring plains vast Fidel. They promised a secret knowledge that would guarantee a better, blessed afterlife. It was deeply personal.
But as history marches forward, nothing lasts forever. As we move into what historians call the twilight of the gods, the intellectual and geopolitical landscape of the Mediterranean starts to shift violently.
In the classical period, roughly 480 to 323 BC, Athens and Sparta defeat the massive Persian invasions. They enter their golden age. Athens becomes an empire. They build a stunning Parthenon. They invent theater. But they also invent formal philosophy.
And philosophy starts turning a critical, logical eye on these ancient stories, asking some really uncomfortable questions about the gods.
You have early thinkers like Xenophanes of Colophon. He looks at the myths and openly mocks the anthropomorphic nature of the gods. He famously points out the inherent bias in religion, writing that if oxen, horses, or lions had hands and could draw, they would draw their gods to look exactly like oxen, horses, and lions.
He is calling out the fact that humans just projected their own flaws into the sky.
And then you have Plato, writing in his Republic. He looks at the traditional Homeric stories of Zeus constantly cheating on his wife, of Cronus eating his kids, of Achilles disrespecting the dead. And Plato says, wait, if the gods are supposed to be perfect and morally superior, why do they act like spoiled, violent, petty children? We cannot teach these stories to our youth.
The intellectual elites start treating the myths less as literal historical truths and more as allegorical metaphors for natural forces.
And then the geopolitical reality shifts forever. The independent Greek city-states weaken each other through the Peloponnesian War. They are conquered by Alexander the Great, and eventually, the new superpower of the Mediterranean arrives. In 146 BC, Rome conquers Greece and burns the city of Corinth.
But the Romans don't wipe out the Greek religion, do they?
No, the Romans are intensely pragmatic. They recognize the cultural power of the Greek pantheon, so they absorb it. They engage in interpretatio Graeca, merging the Greek gods with their own local Italian deities.
Zeus becomes Jupiter, Hera becomes Juno, Athena becomes Minerva, Ores becomes Mars. But in doing so, they fundamentally change their nature.
How so?
The Greek gods were wild, unpredictable forces of nature. The Roman gods are turned into polished symbols of imperial statecraft, military discipline, and rigid order. They become the mascots for the Roman Empire's expansion.
But the final blow to the ancient pantheon doesn't come from a Roman sword. It comes from a radically new faith emerging from the Levant. Christianity spreads rapidly across the Roman Empire in the first few centuries AD.
And Christianity offers everything the old pagan system lacked. It offers a single, omnipotent God. It offers stark, uncompromising moral clarity. And it offers eternal salvation without the messy, lustful, unpredictable baggage of the Olympian gods.
To a poor person in the Roman Empire, the message of Christianity was vastly more appealing than sacrificing a bull to Jupiter.
By the late 4th century AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, who is a staunch Christian, issues decrees officially closing all the pagan temples. He extinguishes the eternal fire of the Vestal Virgins. He bans the Olympic Games, which had run for over 1,000 years because they were a pagan festival.
There is no final apocalyptic battle for Mount Olympus. There is no Ragnarok where the gods go down swinging. The altar fires simply go out. The marble statues weather in the rain.
The vast, thundering gods of the ancient world fade from living, breathing worship into literature and quiet memory.
But they don't truly die. This is what I love about this stack of sources. The gods survived in the illuminated manuscripts of monastic libraries, copied by monks who appreciate the beautiful Latin and Greek poetry.
And then, during the Renaissance in the 14th and 15th centuries, they explode back into European consciousness. Painters like Botticelli, sculptors like Michelangelo, and poets revive them, not as religious figures to be worshipped, but as the ultimate artistic symbols of the human condition.
And as we move into the 20th century, modern pioneers of psychology, like Carl Jung, look back at these myths and realize something profound. They aren't just old stories. They are psychological archetypes. They are the fundamental building blocks of human experience, hardwired into our collective unconscious. The Greeks just gave them names and faces.
When we talk about an Oedipus complex or a Narcissus complex or the Herculean effort, we're still using their vocabulary.
Precisely. The Greeks gave their terrifying universe human faces, and by doing so, they created a brilliant, enduring framework. They gave us the vocabulary to explain the violent chaos of the natural world, to wrestle with the absolute finality of death, and to honor beauty in a way that vastly outlasted their own stone empires.
So, from the yawning, silent darkness of primordial chaos, to the ashes of the Bronze Age collapse, to the stunning heights of the Parthenon, we've seen how a single culture's desperate stories can truly become the unshakable DNA of Western civilization. But I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today.
Go for it.
Building on what we just discussed with modern psychology, I want you to consider our very modern 21st century obsessions. Think about our addiction to sprawling comic book cinematic universes where godlike superheroes battle over the fate of the universe in the sky.
Or think about our intense, borderline worshipful focus on celebrity culture, political dynasties, and the constant scandals of pop stars.
Are those things doing the exact same psychological work for us today that the Olympian pantheon did for a Greek farmer 3,000 years ago? Are we looking at Superman and Iron Man, or poring over the dramatic portrayals of celebrities on social media, and fundamentally just telling the Iliad all over again? Are we still just projecting our deepest fears, our geopolitical anxieties, and our unspoken desires onto larger-than-life figures, just dressing them up in spandex and designer clothes instead of bronze armor and marble?
It is a phenomenal point. If you look closely at how we consume narrative today, the core human need for myth hasn't changed a single bit. We just stopped building marble temples and started building movie theaters and data centers.
Exactly. So the next time you walk into a museum and look at one of those pristine, pure white marble statues, I want you to remember what is hiding just beneath the surface. It was never clean. It was painted in the loud, messy, vivid, and profoundly beautiful colors of human survival. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
So if I asked you to just picture ancient Greece right now, keep questioning
What
do you see? Like, what actually pops into your head?
I think for most people, it's guys in pristine white togas.
Right. Togas, maybe sandals.
Yeah, standing on the steps of some gleaming marble temple, debating the finer points of democracy.
Exactly. Or, maybe you see a phalanx of Spartans with those iconic bronze helmets, shields locked, just holding the line.
Sure, the classic Hollywood image.
But what if I told you that to find the true origins of the people who shape the modern world you live in right now, we have to look 200,000 years earlier?
That is a massive jump backward.
It really is. I mean, we have to look at people surviving ice ages, sheltering in deep caves, and paddling these really rudimentary boats across volcanic seas just to find sharper rocks.
It completely upends the traditional timeline we keep in our heads. We tend to start the clock on Greek history around the time of the Trojan War.
Or maybe the first Olympics, right?
Right. Exactly. But the geological and geographical reality of the Greek landscape was forging a very specific type of human resilience, literally hundreds of thousands of years before anyone ever uttered the name Zeus.
It's all about the environment.
It is. I've actually just updated my backdrop here. You'll see a layered visual. It's this harsh, sun-bleached, jagged mountain range plunging straight into a deep blue sea.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's beautiful.
But superimposed over it all are ancient star charts, because that is the absolute crucible of the Greek identity. Their feet were trapped on incredibly difficult, fragmented, rocky terrain, but their minds were entirely focused on conquering the cosmos.
I really love that visual. And it's going to be basically our compass for this deep dive. Our mission today is monumental.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are taking a massive stack of sources. So archaeological records, historical analyses, and deep dives into mythology to trace the entire story of ancient Greece.
From the very beginning.
Right. But we aren't just walking down a timeline. We want to understand the actual mechanics of this culture. We are tracing a through line of intense competition, environmental survival, and an overwhelming cultural obsession with hubris.
Hubris, yes. That fatal pride.
Exactly. The kind of fatal pride that builds empires and then just burns them right to the ground.
Because you really can't understand the Greeks by just looking at their political achievements. You have to understand the physical environment that forced them into those political systems in the first place.
The geography dictated the politics.
Completely. And you have to understand the terrifying myths they invented to make sense of the chaos around them. I mean, the history and the mythology aren't two separate subjects.
They blend together.
To the Greeks, they were the exact same thing.
Okay, let's unpack this from the literal ground up. If we are blowing past the toga-wearing philosophers and going back to the absolute dawn of human habitation in the Aegean, what does that world actually look like?
Well, it looks like the Apodema Cave, which is located on the Mani Peninsula in southern Greece.
The Mani Peninsula.
Yeah, the Mani is this rugged, totally unforgiving finger of land jutting into the Mediterranean. And recently, the archaeological record there yielded something that fundamentally shifted our understanding of human migration.
Oh, really? What did they find?
Inside this cave, researchers found the remains of two skulls. One was Neanderthal, the other was anatomically modern human, so Homo sapiens.
Okay, so they were sharing the space.
Maybe not at the exact same time, but here's the crazy part. That modern human skull dates back roughly 210,000 years.
Wait, hold on. 210,000 years ago?
Yeah.
That completely shatters the out-of-Africa timeline most of us were taught in school, right?
Right.
Like, I thought modern humans only reached Europe maybe 40 or 50,000 years ago.
It absolutely forces a massive recalculation. Now, I should clarify, this specific early population of Homo sapiens likely didn't survive.
Oh, they died out.
Yeah, they were probably outcompeted by Neanderthals or wiped out by severe climatic shifts. So the permanent settlement of modern humans in Europe happened at a later date.
Right, the later migrations.
Exactly. But the takeaway is that the Greek peninsula has been a crossroads, a literal testing ground for human survival since the Middle Pleistocene.
Which totally makes sense when you just look at a map. Greece is this jagged bridge between the Near East, Africa, and Europe.
It's the bottleneck.
Right. If you are migrating out of the Levant or North Africa, you're going to hit the Aegean Sea and the Greek mainland. So how do we get from surviving in a cave to the actual foundations of a civilization?
We have to look at how they mastered their environment, and specifically the sea. Let's jump forward a bit to the Mesolithic period, roughly 13,000 to 7,000 BC.
Okay, so we're getting closer to the end of the last ice age.
Exactly. There's a site called the French Cave in the Peloponnese. Archaeologists excavating the deepest layers of this cave found something super curious: obsidian.
Oh, volcanic glass.
Yeah.
That is incredibly sharp. Like, it's the best material in the world for making a cutting tool or a weapon before the invention of metallurgy.
It really is.
You can get an edge on obsidian that is literally sharper than a modern surgical scalpel.
Exactly, but the geological catch here is that there are no obsidian sources near the French Cave. None at all.
So where do they get it?
By chemically analyzing the glass, archaeologists pinpointed its origin to the island of Melos.
Okay, an island?
Yeah, and Melos is roughly 150 kilometers away across the open Aegean Sea.
Let me stop you right there. We are talking about 10,000 years before the birth of Christ.
Yes, we are.
They didn't have sails. They certainly didn't have navigational instruments. The Aegean is notorious for sudden, violent storms and really tricky currents.
It's a very dangerous body of water.
Are you telling me Paleolithic hunter-gatherers were routinely crossing an open, dangerous sea just to get rocks?
They absolutely were. I mean, they were likely using dugout canoes or maybe rafts made of bundled reeds.
That is wild.
It is. It requires a profound understanding of currents, wind patterns, and the stars. What this tells us is that seafaring in Greece predates agriculture. It predates permanent villages. The very first distinct cultural trait of the people inhabiting this region is that they were mariners. The sea wasn't a barrier to them, it was the ultimate highway.
That completely reframes how I think about early humans. You know, we always think of them as landbound hunters following mammoths or whatever, but these guys are essentially prehistoric ocean voyagers.
Exactly.
And that maritime DNA seems to directly fuel the first real cultural explosion in the region, right? Because as we transition into the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BC, we hit the Cycladic civilization.
Right, the Cyclades. They are a circular group of islands in the Central Aegean. The people living there began extracting the abundant, high-quality white marble of the islands to carve these astonishing figurines.
I've actually seen pictures of these in the sources, and they are so jarring.
How so?
Because they don't look ancient at all. They look like something you'd see in a modern art museum in New York.
Oh, the minimalist style.
Yeah, they are flat, with folded arms, these elongated necks, and entirely featureless faces, except for really sharp prominent nose.
It's the abstraction that makes them so timeless. In the early 20th century, modernists like Pablo Picasso and Konstantin Bronkai were totally obsessed with them.
I can totally see that influence.
Right, because the Cycladic sculptors had basically reduced the human form to its absolute geometric essence. Now, we have to remember, they didn't have iron or steel chisels to do this.
How did they carve marble without steel?
They were carving this marble using emery, which is a harder abrasive stone found on the island of Naxos. So it was this painstaking grinding process.
That must have taken forever. Do we know what they were actually for? Were they gods? Or toys?
That's the frustrating part of pre-literate societies. We just don't have the texts to tell us. The vast majority of them were found in graves lying flat on their backs alongside the deceased.
So they have a funerary purpose?
Likely, yeah. They might have been representations of a mother goddess, or perhaps stand-ins for mourners, or even servants for the afterlife.
Kind of like the Ushapti figures in Egypt.
Sort of, yes. But whatever their specific purpose, they signify a crucial cognitive leap. These people aren't just surviving anymore. They are taking raw stone and imposing a highly stylized conceptual vision of humanity onto it.
And that conceptual vision scales up dramatically when we move slightly south to the island of Crete, right?
It certainly does.
Which brings us to the first true heavyweight civilization of the Aegean, the Minoans. They flourished roughly from 2700 to 1450 BC.
That's the era, yes.
And the British archaeologist Arthur Evans, who excavated their ruins in the early 1900s, named them after the legendary King Minos from Greek myth.
Which is an important distinction to make. We have absolutely no idea what the Minoans called themselves.
Really? None?
None. Their writing system, which we call Linear A, remains completely undeciphered to this day.
That is so frustrating for historians, I bet.
Oh, totally. But what they left behind visually speaks volumes. The Minoans built Europe's first palace complexes. The most famous is Knossos, which is a sprawling multi-story structure covering just acres of land.
But the word palace is almost misleading here, isn't it? When we hear palace, we think of Versailles or Buckingham Palace-like, a fancy house for a king to throw parties in.
Right, a royal residence.
But Knossos wasn't just a royal residence.
Not at all. It was the beating heart of a highly centralized, redistributive economy.
Redistributive economy. Unpack that for us.
Sure. The Minoan palaces were massive administrative and logistical hubs. Imagine thousands of interconnected rooms, courtyards, workshops, and these deep basement storage magazines.
Like ancient warehouses.
Exactly. The farmers across Crete would bring their surplus grain, olives, and wine to the palace. The palace administrators, who were meticulously tracking everything on clay tablets using that Linear A script, would store it in these man-sized clay jars called pithoi.
Man-sized jars.
Yeah, they were huge. Then, the palace would redistribute these goods. They'd either pay artisans to craft luxury items, or they'd trade the surplus overseas to places like Egypt and the Levant.
So it's essentially a massive Bronze Age corporation operating out of a central warehouse.
That's a great way to think about it.
And the sheer scale and complexity of this warehouse is actually where the myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth comes from, right?
It makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Because if you're a simple farmer walking into Knossos with its twisting corridors, light wells, and dead ends, it would absolutely feel like a maze. You'd get lost instantly.
Precisely. In fact, the sacred symbol of the Minoan religion was the labrys, which is a double-headed axe. This symbol was carved all over the walls of Knossos.
Ah, so labrys becomes labyrinth?
Exactly. The House of the Labrys eventually corrupted linguistically into the word labyrinth.
That is so cool. What strikes me most about the Minoans, though, is the overall vibe of their art.
It's very unique for the period.
It really is. You look at the frescoes painted on the walls of Knossos, and there are literally no scenes of war. No kings crushing their enemies under chariots, which is exactly what you see in Egyptian or Mesopotamian art of the exact same era.
They had a totally different focus.
Instead, the Minoans painted dolphins swimming playfully. They painted blue monkeys plucking saffron.
And the bull leaping?
Yes. These incredible scenes of bull leaping where young men and women would literally vault over the horns of a charging bull. It just feels like a society totally obsessed with nature and joy rather than conquest.
It's a very seductive image, isn't it? This peaceful, matriarchal island paradise. But we do have to be careful not to romanticize them too much.
Right, because nobody stays in power that long just by being nice.
Exactly. You don't control the trade of the entire Eastern Mediterranean without a formidable navy to protect your shipping lanes from piracy. The reason Knossos didn't have massive defensive walls wasn't necessarily because they were pacifists.
Why was it then?
It was because the Mediterranean Sea was their wall, and their fleet was their defense.
Right, the classic, we don't need a moat because we own the ocean strategy. But that strategy has a fatal flaw. What happens when the threat doesn't come from a pirate ship, but from a heavily armed, highly organized culture that just realized your island is filled with undefended gold and bronze?
Then you have a very big problem.
Enter the Mycenaeans.
Yes. The Mycenaeans are the stark, brutal contrast to the Minoans. They emerge on the Greek mainland around 1600 BC, and they are the first society we can definitively call Greek.
Why is that?
Because we can actually read their writing system, Linear B. And it turns out Linear B is an early form of the Greek language.
Oh, so they were the first Greek speakers.
Exactly. And where the Minoans built sprawling, open palaces on an island, the Mycenaeans built imposing, heavily fortified citadels on high, rocky outcrops on the mainland. Places like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos.
The sources describe their fortifications as cyclopean walls. I really want to linger on this because the mechanics of these walls are just insane.
They are architectural marvels.
We are talking about limestone boulders that weigh up to 10 tons each, fitted together without mortar, just stacked high on a hilltop. How do you even move a 10-ton rock in the Bronze Age?
It requires a level of engineering, forced labor, and centralized authoritarian control that is just staggering. They used earth ramps, massive timber rollers, and teams of oxen plus hundreds of men pulling on thick ropes just to inch these boulders up the mountainside.
The amount of calories and coordination that takes is hard to fathom.
The effort required is so immense that hundreds of years later, the later Greeks looked at these walls and concluded that ordinary humans couldn't possibly have built them.
They blamed it on monsters.
They believed a mythical race of one-eyed giants, the Cyclops, had been hired to stack the stones, hence the name Cyclopean walls.
So, if the Minoans are like the wealthy, artistic merchant marines operating out of an open-air warehouse, the Mycenaeans are the heavily armed survivalists, hoarding bronze weapons behind giant stone walls on the mainland.
That is a perfect analogy.
And eventually, the survivalists decide they want what the merchants have.
Sometime around 1450 BC, Minoan civilization suffers a catastrophic shock. We know there was a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, which is modern-day Santorini.
Right, one of the biggest eruptions in human history.
Huge. It sent tsunamis crashing into Crete and likely blanketed their fields in ash. Now, whether the Mycenaeans took advantage of this environmental disaster or they simply used their superior military might, they invaded Crete.
They just walked right in.
They took over Knossos. The artists were conquered by the warriors.
And this militaristic warrior ethos of the Mycenaeans is super crucial because these warlords, hoarding gold in their citadels, riding into battle on chariots, trading in bronze, these are the historical models for the heroes of the Trojan War.
Absolutely.
If a King Agamemnon or an Achilles actually existed in real life, they were Mycenaean warlords. They represent the absolute peak of power in the Bronze Age.
They were the masters of their world. But, you know, the defining characteristic of history is that no matter how thick your walls are, the systems you rely on can always fail.
Which brings us to one of the most terrifying and mysterious events in human history.
The late Bronze Age collapse.
Around 1200 BC, it's as if someone just pulled the plug on civilization across the entire eastern Mediterranean.
It was incredibly sudden.
It wasn't just the Mycenaeans falling apart. The Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey completely collapses. The Egyptian New Kingdom barely survives and goes into this severe decline. The great trading cities of the Levant are literally burned to the ground.
Total devastation.
What actually happened? How does an interconnected, globalized Bronze Age world just vanish?
Historians refer to it as a systems collapse, and it's eerily relevant to our modern world. The Bronze Age economies were highly specialized and totally dependent on international trade.
Give us an example.
Think about bronze itself. To make bronze, you need copper, which was fairly abundant in Cyprus, and you need tin. But tin is incredibly rare.
Oh, right. You can't just mine it anywhere.
No. The Mycenaeans likely had to import tin from as far away as modern-day Afghanistan or even Cornwall in Britain, utilizing massive, complex trade networks.
So it's exactly like a modern supply chain.
Very much so.
If one crucial link breaks, say, a major semiconductor factory goes offline today, the whole global manufacturing line stops. If the tin trade routes are disrupted back then, You literally cannot make the metal that your entire military and agricultural system is based on.
Exactly. You can't make swords, you can't make plowshares, and the archaeological record shows a perfect storm of disruptions hitting all at once.
It wasn't just one thing.
No, we have evidence of severe, multi-decade droughts across the Mediterranean, leading to catastrophic crop failures.
And when people starve,
They migrate or they rebel. We see the destruction of palace centers, likely from internal peasant revolts, people overthrowing the elites who are demanding taxes but failing to provide food in return.
makes sense. If the king can't feed you, why pay him?
Right. On top of that, there's evidence of massive earthquakes in Greece during this window. And finally, the infamous Sea Peoples.
Ah, the Sea Peoples, the absolute boogeymen of the Bronze Age. The Egyptian records talk about these mysterious, marauding fleets of warriors coming from the sea, burning everything in their path. Who were they?
The term Sea Peoples is a bit of a historical umbrella. They weren't a single, unified empire with a king.
So not a coordinated invasion.
Unlikely. They were more likely a massive, desperate coalition of displaced refugees, pirates, and opportunists.
Driven by the climate change and famine.
Exactly. Imagine millions of people uprooted by drought in the Western Mediterranean or the Balkans, packing their families onto boats and just moving east to find food, raiding coastal cities along the way. They were a symptom of the collapse, not just the root cause.
So the palaces burn, the kings either die or flee. The international trade network evaporates completely. And the aftermath for Greece is a period roughly from 1100 to 800 BC that historians call the Greek Dark Ages.
A very grim time.
Now, dark doesn't mean the sun didn't shine, obviously, but it means they go dark to us, the historians, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The most tragic casualty of the Bronze Age collapse in Greece was the complete and total loss of literacy.
They just forgot how to write.
Well, the Mycenaeans used Linear B to manage their complex palace economies. But when the palaces burned and the centralized economy vanished, there was no longer a need for a specialized class of scribes to track tons of grain.
Because there was no surplus grain to track.
Right. Within a generation or two, the Greeks completely forgot how to read and write. They lost their own recorded history.
I really want you, the listener, to sit with that for a second. Just imagine our society today suffers a massive grid collapse, and within 50 years, nobody remembers how to read a book or how to use a computer.
It's a terrifying thought.
You are left trying to survive in a much poorer, smaller world. The Greeks in the Dark Ages went from living in these grand palace economies to scraping by in small, isolated mud brick farming villages.
And this is where the geography of Greece plays its most psychological role. Imagine you are a simple Greek farmer in, say, 900 BC. You are illiterate. You live in a hut with a thatched roof.
Pretty meager existence.
Very. But every day, as you herd your goats up the rugged hills of the Peloponnese, you walk past the ruins of Mycenae. You see these colossal, perfectly fitted, 10-ton stone walls. You see the massive tholos tombs, shaped like giant beehives, just slowly eroding out of the hillside.
If I'm that farmer, I know for a fact that I didn't build those walls. I know my father didn't build them. My entire village working together couldn't even move one of those rocks. So who did?
The only logical conclusion to a pre-literate mind is that you are living in the post-apocalyptic ruins of a world that used to belong to giants, demigods, and monsters. The physical ruins of the Mycenaeans literally became the incubator for Greek mythology.
This is the mechanism of how history morphs into myth. The factual kernels of the Bronze Age, the wealthy warlords, the giant fortresses, the massive overseas raids were passed down through oral storytelling.
Through the bards.
Right? Bards would sit around the fire, strumming a lyre, singing songs about the ancestors. And over 300 or 400 years of the Dark Ages, a standard raid on a trading city in modern-day Turkey gets exaggerated, polished, and mythologized into a 10-year epic siege involving gods and magic.
It becomes the Trojan War.
Because they had lost their written history, the Greeks had to invent a cosmic history to explain their world, to explain those massive ruins, and to forge a cultural identity.
They built an entire universe in their minds to compensate for the poverty of their physical reality.
Let's dive deep into that cosmos of the mind, because the mythology they created is brutal, it's complex, and it's deeply revealing of how they view the universe. How does a Greek in the Dark Ages explain the actual creation of the world?
Well, it starts not with a loving creator, but with chaos. And we have to be really careful with that word. In ancient Greek, chaos doesn't mean disorder or confusion like it does today.
What did it mean to them?
It translates closer to a chasm, like a yawning, gaping void of absolute nothingness.
Okay, so just an empty abyss.
Hmm.
And from that void emerge the primordial elemental forces. You get Gaia, the earth, which is the solid foundation of everything.
Yes.
You get Tartarus, this abyssal, terrifying pit far beneath the earth. And crucially, you get Eros.
Right, and not the chubby Cupid shooting arrows we think of today.
Definitely not.
Sure.
Eros as the fundamental primal force of attraction and procreation. Eros is basically the cosmic binding agent that forces these elements to interact and reproduce.
Exactly. And without a male partner, Gaia brings forth Uranus, the starry sky, to cover her on all sides. Uranus becomes her consort, but this is where the Greek cosmology quickly reveals its harshness. Uranus is a terrible, oppressive father.
The worst.
Gaia gives birth to the first generation of beings, the Titans, but she also gives birth to monsters, the Cyclopes, who possess immense strength and a single eye, and the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones.
Hundred-handed ones. I've always wondered about the anatomy of 100 arms on one torso, but practically they represent the terrifying, chaotic forces of nature like violent storms and massive earthquakes.
That's the best way to understand them. Uranus looks at these monstrous children, is utterly repulsed by them, and fears their power, so he commits the very first cosmic crime. As soon as they are born, he shoves them back inside Gaia, imprisoning them deep within the earth.
You have to imagine the physical metaphor they are using here. The sky is pressing down so hard on the earth that nothing can emerge. Gaia is an immense, literal, physical agony from having her children trapped inside her.
She's suffering terribly.
So desperate, she crafts a massive, jagged sickle out of flint, which, by the way, is a fascinating detail, a nod back to the Stone Age tools we talked about earlier.
A great connection, yes.
She begs her Titan children to help her, but they're all terrified of the sky. Only the youngest, Cronus, who is most ambitious and cunning, steps up.
And the ambush scene is incredibly visceral. Gaia hides Cronus in an ambush spot. When Uranus comes down to lie with Gaia, bringing the darkness of night with him, Cronus strikes.
It's pretty gruesome.
It is. He reaches out with his left hand, grabs his father's genitals, and with the flint sickle in his right hand, he castrates Uranus. He then throws the severed flesh into the sea.
It is an incredibly violent succession myth, but it establishes a core rule of how the Greeks viewed power. It is never freely given, it is always brutally taken.
Absolutely. And actions have consequences. From the blood that falls on the earth, the Furies, the spirits of vengeance are born.
Right.
And from the severed flesh foaming in the sea, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and sexual desire, emerges. It's a profound psychological statement that out of ultimate violence and severance comes both absolute vengeance and overwhelming desire.
So, with the sky permanently separated from the earth, Cronus takes the throne. He is the new king of the cosmos.
Yeah.
But here's the catch about power in Greek myth. It makes you paranoid.
It always does.
As Uranus was overthrown, a prophecy was spoken that Cronus too would be overthrown by his own child. The cycle of trauma is just baked into the universe.
Cronus marries his sister, the Titaness Rhea. But to cheat this prophecy, he resorts to extreme measures.
Understatement.
Every time Rhea gives birth to a child, Cronus takes the infant and swallows it whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, one by one he eats them. He believes he is outsmarting fate by physically turning his own body into a prison for his potential rivals.
It's horrifying. But Rhea finally breaks. When she is pregnant with her sixth child, Zeus, she flees to the island of Crete, which ties the mythology right back to the geography we just discussed with the Minoans.
Yes, back to the caves.
She gives birth to Zeus in a hidden cave on Mount Ida. She wraps a large stone in swaddling clothes and hands it to Cronus. He is so blinded by paranoia that he swallows the rock without even checking to see if it's a baby.
Zeus is raised in secret, guarded by warriors who clash their spears against their shields to drown out his crying so Cronus won't hear him from Olympus.
The Curetes, right?
Exactly. When Zeus reaches adulthood, he doesn't just attack his father with brute force, he uses strategy. He returns to the Titan court in disguise as a cupbearer.
He goes undercover.
He does, and he slips an emetic, a vomiting potion provided by the Titaness Metis, who represents cunning intelligence, into Cronus's wine.
Cronus drinks it, gets violently ill, and vomits up the stone, followed by the fully grown, immortal siblings of Zeus. They emerge from his stomach totally ready for war. And this kicks off the Titanomachy.
The Great War.
The 10-year cosmic war between the old gods, the Titans stationed on Mount Othrys, and the new gods, the Olympians, stationed on Mount Olympus.
And the war grinds on for 10 years, essentially as a stalemate. The Titans have the raw, brute strength of the older cosmos. Zeus realizes he needs an edge to win.
So what does he do?
On the advice of his grandmother, Gaia, he descends into Tartarus and does what his father and grandfather completely refused to do. He frees the monsters. He releases the Cyclops and the hundred-handed ones.
And this is where the balance of power permanently shifts, because the Cyclops aren't just physically strong, they are master craftsmen.
The ultimate smiths.
In gratitude for their freedom, they forge the ultimate weapons of the Greek mythos. They give Hades the helm of darkness, granting him total invisibility. They give Poseidon the trident, which can shatter the earth and churn the seas.
And for Zeus?
To Zeus, they give the ultimate weapon of mass destruction, the thunderbolt.
Armed with these weapons, the Olympians launch a devastating final assault. The hundred-handed ones are literally throwing a volley of 300 boulders at a time, creating this barrage that just darkens the sky.
Like ancient artillery.
Exactly. Zeus is hurling lightning that scorches the earth and literally boils the seas. The Titans are broken, defeated, and cast down into the darkest depths of Tartarus, bound in chains of bronze.
The Olympians have won. But how do you actually govern a cosmos you just nearly destroyed? The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, don't fight a civil war over the throne.
No, they're smarter than that.
They do something remarkably democratic, or at least equitable. They draw lots.
They put the realms of the world to chance. Zeus draws the sky and gets the ultimate kingship. Poseidon draws the sea, and Hades draws the underworld.
Which, I think it's vital to clarify here, is not the fiery, punitive hell of later Christian theology.
No, not at all.
The Greek underworld is a vast, mostly neutral, shadowy realm where the souls of the dead just drift aimlessly, lacking memory and purpose. The earth and Mount Olympus itself remain common ground for all the gods to interact on.
So Mount Olympus becomes this new divine court. But as a listener, if you're expecting a council of wise, benevolent deities sitting on clouds, you are in for a shock.
Major shock.
The Olympians are a deeply flawed, highly political, and often chaotic family. Which really brings us to where humanity fits into this entire picture, because we aren't created by Zeus in some beautiful moment of love.
No, we are totally an afterthought.
Humanity's creation is credited to Prometheus, a titan, who had the foresight to side with Zeus during the war. According to the myth, he sculpts mankind out of river clay and water.
But humanity is pretty pathetic at first,
It's
right?
incredibly pathetic. In the distribution of natural gifts, the animals got the fur, the fangs, the speed, and the claws. Humans were left naked, freezing in caves, and utterly terrified of the dark.
Prometheus loves his creation, though, and he feels immense pity for us. He goes to Zeus and actually asks for humanity to be given fire.
But Zeus flatly refuses. He wants mortals to remain weak, subservient, and totally dependent on the gods.
So, Prometheus pulls off the ultimate cosmic heist. He sneaks up to Olympus, steals a spark of divine fire from the forge of Hephaestus, hides it inside a hollow fennel stalk to keep it burning, and brings it down to mankind.
We have to understand what fire represents here symbolically. It's not just warmth. Fire is the catalyst for all of human civilization. With fire, humanity can cook food, surviving the winters. They can smelt metal to make tools and weapons. Fire represents technology, progress, and independence from the natural elements. By giving us fire, Prometheus essentially gave us the tools to rival the gods.
And Zeus is absolutely livid. He recognizes that fire makes humans dangerous. He punishes humanity by ordering the creation of the first woman, Pandora.
And he gives her a gift.
She is given a sealed jar, which, fun fact, was later mistranslated by a Renaissance scholar named Erasmus as a box. But it was originally a large clay pithos jar, just like the ones the Minoans use for storage.
That's a great detail. The gods gift Pandora with beauty, charm, and deceit, but most importantly, a divinely instilled, burning curiosity. When she arrives among mortals, she inevitably opens the jar.
She can't help it.
Out flies every sorrow that plagues the human condition. Disease, hard labor, famine, grief, and madness. She manages to slam the lid shut just before the last entity escapes, which is hope.
It's a very bleak view of the human condition when you think about it. We only have technology because a Titan stole it for us. And our lives are filled with misery as a direct punishment for having that technology.
And what happens to Prometheus?
His punishment is literally the stuff of nightmares. Zeus chains him to a rock at the eastern edge of the world, in the Caucasus Mountains. Every single day, a giant eagle flies down and tears open his abdomen to eat his liver.
Because he is immortal, the liver regenerates overnight, and the torture begins again the next morning. Forever.
It is the ultimate punishment for defying the natural hierarchy. Now, looking at all of this, the castration, the child eating, the eternal torture, the petty revenge, it's very common for modern readers to ask a specific question.
What's that?
I have to push back here because this is exactly what I'm thinking and probably what you at home are thinking. If you were building a society, why on earth would you invent and worship gods who act like sociopathic reality TV stars with superpowers?
It's a fair question.
They are jealous, they assault mortals, they betray each other, they destroy cities over incredibly petty slights. Why worship them?
It's a brilliant question, and it requires us to really step outside our modern paradigm. We are conditioned by Judeo-Christian traditions to expect our deities to be the ultimate moral arbiters, perfect beings who model exactly how we should behave.
Be good, go to heaven.
Right. But the Greeks didn't invent their gods to be moral role models. They invented their gods to accurately mirror the terrifying, unpredictable forces of the natural world they lived in.
Going back to the geography, if you live in a world where a sudden earthquake can just swallow your village, or a storm can sink your entire trading fleet and bankrupt your city in an afternoon, you don't believe the universe is inherently good or fair.
Exactly. Poseidon doesn't care if you are a righteous, generous person. Poseidon is the sea. If you sail in winter, he will drown you because the sea is indifferent to human morality.
Wow, yeah.
Zeus is the thunderstorm. Aphrodite is the overwhelming, sometimes incredibly destructive compulsion of sexual desire that can tear entire families apart.
They are forces of nature.
The gods are raw, chaotic power shaped by human appetites. To the Greeks, this theology made perfect sense of a world that was incredibly beautiful, but routinely devastating. You didn't pray to them to make you a better person. You sacrificed to them to bribe them into leaving you alone.
That makes so much sense. It's an explanation of reality, not a blueprint for morality.
And this chaotic intersection between the divine and the mortal world brings us to the heroic age.
The age of the demigods.
The gods didn't just stay on Olympus. They constantly came down to Earth, often in disguise, to meddle in human affairs and sleep with mortals. The result of these unions were the demigods.
The demigods were the bridge between the heavens and the earth. They possessed extraordinary physical strength, cunning, or beauty, but they lacked one thing the gods had: immortality.
They could die.
They were subject to pain, grief, and death, and their stories form the absolute backbone of Greek cultural identity.
Let's look at Perseus for a second. He is the son of a mortal princess, Danae. Her father, terrified of a prophecy that his grandson would kill him, locked her in a bronze chamber. Trying to cheat fate again.
Always works out so well. But Zeus, being Zeus, infiltrated the chamber in the form of a shower of golden rain and impregnated her.
When Perseus grows up, he is forced by a tyrannical king, Polydectes, into what is essentially a suicide mission. He is commanded to bring back the head of Medusa, the only mortal Gorgon.
Medusa is terrifying. She's a monster with venomous snakes for hair, and her gaze is so cursed that anyone who looks directly at her is instantly petrified, turned to solid stone.
It's an impossible task for a mortal, so the gods intervene. Athena gives him a highly polished bronze shield to act as a mirror. Hermes gives him winged sandals for flight and a curved sword. Hades provides the helm of invisibility.
The mechanics of the kill are so fascinating. Perseus flies to the edge of the world, finds the Gorgons sleeping, and approaches Medusa by walking backward, looking only at her reflection in the mirror's shield to avoid her petrifying gaze.
Very clever.
He severs her head, tosses it into a magic bag, and uses the winged sandals and invisibility to escape her immortal waking sisters.
He then uses the severed head, which, by the way, retains its power even after death, as a weapon of mass destruction. He turns a sea monster to stone to save the Princess Andromeda, and he returns home to turn the tyrannical King Polydectes and his entire court into statues.
He essentially weaponized the curse to found the great dynasty of Mycenae.
And from the bloodline of Perseus comes the most famous Greek hero of them all, Heracles, or Hercules as the Romans later called him, the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene.
Heracles has a rough go of it from day one. Hera, the queen of the gods and Zeus's eternally jealous wife, hates Heracles because he is living, breathing proof of her husband's infidelity.
She tries to kill him constantly.
She sends 2 venomous serpents into his crib when he is just an infant, but baby Heracles just grabs them by the necks and strangles them.
But Hera plays the long game. When Heracles is an adult, married with children, she strikes him with a fit of divine madness. In this delusional state, believing his family to be enemies, Heracles murders his own wife and children.
That is so dark.
When he wakes from the madness and realizes what he has done, The psychological devastation is total.
To atone for this horrific blood guilt, the Oracle of Delphi binds him in servitude to his weak, cowardly cousin, King Eurystheus, who assigns him 12 impossible tasks, the 12 labors.
We usually just think of these as cool monster fights in pop culture.
Right, like an action movie. He strangles the Nemean lion, whose skin is impervious to weapons. He defeats the Lernaean hydra, where cutting off one head causes 2 more to grow by having his nephew cauterize the neck stumps with fire.
He cleans the unimaginably filthy Augean stables in a single day by physically rerouting 2 entire rivers to wash the muck out.
Work smarter, not harder.
He journeys to the very edges of the known world to steal golden apples. His final labor requires him to descend to the underworld itself, wrestle Cerberus, the 3-headed demon dog that guards the gates of death, and literally drag it up to the surface with his bare hands.
Why was Heracles so important to the Greeks? I mean, he isn't a king. He isn't a brilliant strategist like Odysseus. He's just a guy who suffers immensely.
That is exactly why he mattered to them. The labors weren't just feats of brute strength. They were a crucible of penance. Heracles embodies the ultimate mortal endurance against impossible divinely ordained odds.
He just keeps going.
He represents the idea that life is full of unfair suffering and monsters you didn't ask to fight. But through sheer grit, determination, and physical exertion, a human being can push through it. He was the patron hero of athletes and soldiers, proving that human effort could transcend the cruelty of fate.
Contrast that with someone like Theseus, who feels like a much more political, calculated hero. Theseus is tied to the city of Athens. His great myth is traveling to the island of Crete again, mythology echoing that Bronze Age reality, to stop this horrific tribute where Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years to be fed to the Minotaur.
The Minotaur, half-man, half-bull, is locked deep inside the labyrinth of Knossos. Theseus volunteers the tribute. When he arrives, the Minoan princess Ariadne falls in love with him. She gives him a ball of thread.
The famous thread.
He ties it to the doorframe, navigates the dark, twisting maze, beats the Minotaur to death, and uses the thread to find his way back out.
It's a great story, but the aftermath is what really defines Athens. Theseus returns, but he forgets to change the black sails of his ship to white, which was the prearranged signal to his father, King Aegeus, that he had survived.
A tragic oversight.
Aegeus sees the black sails, assumes his son is dead, and throws himself off a cliff into the sea, which, by the way, is why it's called the Aegean Sea to this day. Theseus becomes king and supposedly unifies the scattered villages of the region into the single powerful city-state of Athens.
He is a nation-building hero. He brings order out of chaos. But Greek myth isn't just about heroes triumphing over monsters. Often it's about heroes realizing they have absolutely no control over their lives whatsoever, which brings us to the tragedy of the House of Thebes.
Oedipus. This is a story that has been analyzed by literally everyone, from ancient playwrights to Sigmund Freud. But let's look at the mechanics of the myth itself. The king of Thebes is given a horrific prophecy by the oracle. His newborn son will grow up to murder him and marry his own mother.
To prevent this, the king orders the infant to be exposed on a mountainside with its ankles pinned together to die.
But a shepherd takes pity on the baby and gives him to the king of Corinth, who raises Oedipus in secret as his own son.
When Oedipus grows up, he hears a rumor about the prophecy. Horrified and believing his adoptive parents are his real parents, he decides he must flee Corinth forever to protect them.
He thinks he's doing the right thing.
He thinks he's using his free will to avoid his destiny. But on the road away from Corinth, he gets into a road rage dispute at a narrow crossroads with an older man in a chariot. The dispute turns violent, and Oedipus kills the man.
He then travels to Thebes, which is being terrorized by the Sphinx, a monster with a lion's body and a woman's head that strangles anyone who can't solve her riddle. Oedipus brilliantly solves the riddle. As a reward for saving the city, he is made the new king of Thebes and is given the hand of the recently widowed queen.
He rules wisely for years, has children, until a plague hits the city. The oracle says the plague will only end when the murderer of the previous king is found and exiled.
So he starts an investigation.
Oedipus launches an aggressive murder investigation, relentlessly following the clues, only to slowly realize the horrifying truth. The man he killed at the crossroads was his biological father, the previous king. The woman he married and had children with is his biological mother.
Upon realizing this, his mother hangs herself.
Yeah.
Oedipus takes the golden pins from her dress and gouges his own eyes out, blinding himself before walking into exile. Now, why did the Greeks tell this story? What's fascinating here is how it highlights the foundational concept of Moira, or fate.
Because Oedipus didn't do anything inherently evil, right? He actually tried to do the right thing by fleeing Corinth.
Exactly. His tragedy was born of ignorance, not malice. To the Greeks, fate was a force so absolute, so tightly woven into the fabric of the cosmos, that even the gods, even Zeus himself, could not change it. Oedipus's story is a profound philosophical statement.
Hmm.
You cannot outrun what is woven for you. The harder you run away from your fate, the faster you run directly into it.
And all this heroic energy, the demigods, the prophecies, the inescapable fate, culminates in the absolute pinnacle of the heroic age, the Trojan War.
The big one.
This is the event that defined the Greek concept of themselves for the rest of their history, and it all starts over an apple at a wedding.
Specifically, the wedding of the mortal Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis. All the gods are invited except Eris, the goddess of discord. Insulted, she crashes the party and tosses a golden apple into the crowd, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest."
Instantly, the three most powerful goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, claim it. They demand Zeus judge between them. But Zeus is smart enough to know that picking one will enrage the other two, so he passes the buck to a mortal.
Smart move.
He selects Paris, a handsome prince of the wealthy city of Troy, which sits on the coast of modern-day Turkey.
The goddesses appear before Paris and immediately resort to bribery. Hera offers him political power over all of Asia. Athena offers him invincibility in war and supreme wisdom. But Aphrodite offers him something visceral, the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world.
And Paris, being a young, impulsive prince, chooses Aphrodite.
The problem is, the most beautiful woman in the world is Helen, and she's already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Under Aphrodite's influence, Paris travels to Sparta as a guest, violates the most sacred, unwritten laws of Greek culture xenia, or guest host hospitality, and runs away with Helen, taking her back across the age into Troy.
Menelaus is furious. He goes to his older brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae. Years prior, all the Greek kings had sworn a sacred oath to protect Helen's marriage. Agamemnon cashes in that oath.
He calls the banners.
He assembles a massive, unprecedented coalition of warlords from all over the Greek mainland and islands. They launch a fleet of 1,000 ships and sail across the Aegean to besiege the impregnable, high-walled city of Troy.
This isn't just a border skirmish or a quick raid. The Iliad describes a grinding, brutal, 10-year siege. It's Bronze Age trench warfare. The Greeks camp on the beach, constantly raiding the surrounding towns for supplies, while the Trojans stay largely locked behind their massive walls, occasionally coming out for pitched battles on the plain.
And the epic isn't really about the tactics of the war, it's about the psychology of the warriors, specifically the rage of Achilles. Achilles is the greatest Greek warrior, a demigod who is essentially an unstoppable killing machine. But he withdraws his troops from the fighting because Agamemnon publicly insults his honor by confiscating a war prize, a captive woman named Briseis.
Achilles essentially says, "Fine, fight without me," and watches the Greeks get slaughtered. It's only when the Trojans breach the Greek camp and threaten to burn the ships that Achilles' beloved companion, Patroclus, borrows Achilles' armor to frighten the Trojans back. Patroclus is killed in combat by Hector, the noble crowned prince of Troy.
The death of Patroclus shatters Achilles. He enters a state of berserker fury that transcends normal warfare. He slaughters Trojans by the hundreds, clogging the local river with bodies until the river god itself rises up to fight him. He finally corners Hector outside the walls of Troy. Hector fights bravely, but Achilles kills him.
And this is where the brutality of the era shines through. Achilles doesn't just kill Hector, he desecrates the body. He strips the armor, pierces Hector's ankles, ties him to the back of his chariot, and drags the corpse around the walls of Troy in full view of Hector's weeping parents. It is a shocking display of hubris and cruelty.
Achilles eventually returns the body after Hector's father, King Priam, sneaks into the Greek camp and begs for his son's corpse. Achilles himself is later killed by an arrow to his heel, his one vulnerable spot shot by Paris. But the war drags on. Brute force hasn't breached the walls of Troy. They need a different tactic.
They need the cunning of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. Odysseus comes up with the ultimate psychological warfare operation. The Greeks pack up their camp, burn their tents, and sail their ships just out of sight behind a nearby island. They leave behind a single, massive wooden horse on the beach, inscribed as an offering to the goddess Athena to ensure a safe voyage home.
Inside the hollow belly of the horse, a select group of Greek commandos, including Odysseus, are hiding in total silence. The Trojans wake up, see the empty beach, and believe they have won the 10-year war. They drag the wooden horse inside their impregnable walls as a trophy. They spend the entire day drinking and celebrating.
In the dead of night, when the city is passed out drunk, the trapdoor opens. The Greeks slip out, silently kill the sentries, and throw open the massive gates to the rest of the Greek army, which had sailed back under the cover of darkness. The sack of Troy is apocalyptic. The men are slaughtered in their beds, the women are enslaved, and the city is burned to ash.
But the Greeks go too far. They commit sacrilege. They drag Trojan princesses away from the altars of the gods. Because they lack restraint in victory, the gods turn against them. Almost none of the Greek heroes get a happy homecoming. Agamemnon is murdered in his bathtub by his own wife the day he gets back. Odysseus is cursed by Poseidon and spends 10 agonizing years fighting monsters and losing all his men before finally making it back to Ithaca, a story told in the Odyssey.
Now, you and I could look at this and say, okay, that's a brilliant piece of epic poetry. We know it's a blend of Bronze Age memories and Doric Age myth-making. But to the Greeks, emerging from centuries of poverty and isolation, this wasn't fiction. This was their actual historical past.
This is the crucial point. If you lived in Sparta or Athens or Thebes in the year 800 BC, you believed your ancestors fought at Troy. You believed Heracles walked the same earth you did. This shared mythic past, recorded in the epics of Homer, was the cultural glue that bound them together.
Okay, let's unpack this. Armed with this shared identity, the Greeks wake up from the Dark Ages. They are ready to build a new society. But because of the trauma of the past, they don't rebuild the massive palace economies of the Mycenaeans. They invent something entirely new. We enter the Archaic period, roughly 800 to 480 BC, and the birth of the polis.
The polis is the defining political and social unit of ancient Greece. We translate it as city-state, but it was much more than just a city. It was an independent, fiercely sovereign, self-governing community of citizens. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Argos, Thebes, these weren't just cities in a country called Greece. Each one was its own micronation, with its own laws, its own calendar, its own coinage, and its own army.
Why didn't they just unify? If they all spoke Greek and believed in the same gods, why not form a giant Greek empire like the Egyptians or the Hittites?
Because the geography wouldn't let them. Look at the map again. Greece is sliced into isolated valleys by harsh, impassable mountain ranges. It's shattered into hundreds of scattered islands. You can't easily march a centralized army across that terrain to enforce the will of a single emperor. The geography dictated local independence. They were locked into their own specific valleys, which made them intensely protective of their autonomy and deeply suspicious of their neighbors.
So they are culturally united but politically fractured. And during this archaic period, this competitive environment sparks incredible innovations. One of the most important is how they reclaim literacy. They don't go back to the clunky administrative linear B. They look across the sea to the Phoenicians' master traders from modern-day Lebanon.
The Phoenicians had an alphabet, which was a massive leap forward from hieroglyphics or cuneiform, where you had to memorize thousands of symbols. But the Phoenician alphabet only had consonants. The Greeks take this alphabet and do something revolutionary. They appropriate some of the unused symbols and turn them into vowels.
It sounds like a small tweak, but the mechanics of adding vowels change everything. It makes the written language infinitely more flexible, precise, and easier to learn. You don't have to be a highly trained palace scribe to read it. A merchant can learn it. A farmer can learn it. It democratizes literacy. And the very first thing they use this new alphabet for is to finally write down the oral epics of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey.
Once you can write things down efficiently, ideas can spread, and the people themselves begin to spread. Between 800 and 500 BC, the population in mainland Greece booms. The rocky soil simply cannot grow enough wheat to feed everyone. Land disputes escalate. The solution: colonization.
And Greek colonization wasn't like British colonization in the 18th century where they conquered land to enrich the motherland. Greek colonies were pressure valves. A city-state like Corinth would essentially say, we have too many people. We're going to build a fleet, load up 1,000 young men and women, take the sacred fire from our temple, and sail to southern Italy to start a brand new, completely independent city.
They swarmed the Mediterranean. They established polis in southern Italy and Sicily, an area that became so densely populated with Greeks. The Romans called it Magna Graecia, Great Greece. They founded Massalia, modern-day Marseille in France. They settled all along the coast of the Black Sea. They essentially exported the polis model to the edges of the known world.
So the Greek world at this point is like a hyper-competitive, incredibly violent sports league. You have hundreds of independent city-states. They all speak the same language. They read the same Homeric epics. They worship the same gods. but they absolutely despise each other politically. They are constantly fighting border wars over tiny strips of arable land.
But there's one thing that can force them to hit pause on the slaughter, and that is the concept of agon, the struggle, the competition. This was deeply ingrained in the Greek psyche. If they weren't fighting each other with spears, they wanted to fight each other in athletics to prove which city was superior in the eyes of the gods.
Which gives us the Olympic Games. Born in 776 BC at the rural sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia. Every 4 years, heralds would travel across the entire Greek world announcing the Ekakaria, a sacred universal truce. Armies had to stop marching. Safe passage was guaranteed for anyone traveling to Olympia.
And the games themselves were brutal. They weren't fighting for silver or bronze medals. There were no second places. The winner got a wreath of olive leaves and immense godlike glory for his home city. The losers got deep public shame. They competed completely naked, covered in olive oil and dust, running in foot races, throwing the javelin, or fighting in the pancration. A terrifying mix of boxing and wrestling with almost no rules, where eye gouging was sometimes the only way you got disqualified.
The Olympics channeled their martial aggression into a religious festival, and this competitive drive, this desire to push boundaries, wasn't just physical, it bled into how they thought about the world. During this period, we see the birth of entirely new ways of thinking.
We see the rise of lyric poetry. For centuries, the only poetry that mattered was epic poetry, Homer singing about warriors and gods. But on the island of Lesbos, a woman named Sappho begins writing poetry about intensely personal human emotions. She writes about love, jealousy, and the physical symptoms of desire. It's a shift from the cosmic to the individual.
And even more radically, we see the birth of philosophy. On the coast of Ionia in modern-day Turkey, thinkers we call the pre-Socratics begin asking a dangerous question. For their entire history, if a Greek saw a lightning bolt strike a tree, the answer was Zeus threw it because he's angry. If there was an earthquake, Poseidon is shaking the earth. But guys like Thales and Heraclitus start asking, what if it's not the gods? What if the universe operates on natural material laws that we can observe and understand?
It is the shift from mythos, supernatural explanation, to logos, rational explanation. Thales allegedly predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BC using mathematics and astronomy. He wasn't relying on an oracle, he was relying on observation. This is the absolute foundation of the scientific method that every listener relies on today.
They're building this incredible, dynamic, argumentative civilization. But there's a massive storm brewing in the East. These independent, bickering city-states who can barely agree on a sacred truce for a foot race are about to be faced with an existential threat so massive it will force them to either unite or be annihilated.
We are moving into the classical peak. The year is 490 BC. Across the Aegean Sea lies the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and we need to understand the scale here. The Persian Empire is the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful superpower the world had ever seen. It stretches from the borders of India through the Middle East all the way to Egypt. The Persian king commands millions of subjects and can field armies so large they purportedly drank rivers dry.
And the Persian king, Darius I, decides he needs to conquer the rocky little peninsula of Greece. Why? Because a few years earlier, some Greek colonies in Ionia, on the coast of his empire, had rebelled against his taxes, and the city of Athens had sent a few ships to help the rebels, even burning a Persian provincial capital. Darius crushed the rebellion, but he never forgot the insult from Athens.
The Persian worldview was one of universal empire. To them, the Greek city-states were just chaotic, noisy terrorists on their western frontier. In 490 BC, Darius sends a massive amphibious task force across the Aegean, landing on a beach at Marathon, just 26 miles outside of Athens. Their goal is to burn Athens to the ground and install a puppet tyrant.
The Athenians are terrified. They send a runner to Sparta begging for help. But the Spartans are in the middle of a religious festival and say, we can't march until the moon is full. So Athens, aided only by a tiny contingent from the city of Plataea, has to face the Persian war machine alone. They are vastly outnumbered.
But the Greeks had a specific tactical advantage, the phalanx. The Persian infantry was lightly armored, relying on wicker shields and overwhelming volleys of arrows. The Greek hoplite was a heavily armored infantryman. They wore solid bronze breastplates, bronze greaves on their shins, Corinthian helmets that covered their entire faces, and carried massive, overlapping wooden and bronze shields called spises. They fought tightly packed together, presenting an impenetrable wall of bronze and spears.
The Athenians do the unthinkable. Instead of waiting behind their walls, they march out to Marathon. Seeing the Persians deployed on the beach, the Greeks literally run at a dead sprint through the shower of Persian arrows to close the distance. The sheer weight and momentum of the armored Greek phalanx smashes into the lightly armed Persian lines, routing them, driving them back into the sea and slaughtering them in the swamps.
It is a miraculous, decisive victory. The legend goes that a messenger named Phidippides ran the roughly 26 miles back to Athens to announce the victory before collapsing dead from exhaustion, which is the literal origin of the modern marathon race. Athens survives, but the Persians are just regrouping.
10 years later, in 480 BC, Darius's son, King Xerxes, returns. And this time, he isn't sending a task force, he is bringing the full weight of the empire. He leads an army so massive they build a bridge of ships across the Hellespont to march into Europe. This is the Second Persian War.
This invasion forces the impossible, an alliance of the Greek city-states. Dozens of Palays put aside their rivalries and agree to fight together. They formulate a desperate defensive strategy. They need to funnel the massive Persian numbers into a bottleneck where their size is a disadvantage. They choose a narrow mountain pass on the coast called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates.
This is the stuff of legend. A small Greek coalition, anchored by 300 elite Spartan warriors under the command of King Leonidas, holds the pass. For 3 days, the Persians hurl wave after wave of their best troops, including the elite immortals, against the Spartan phalanx. But in that narrow space, the heavy bronze armor and disciplined spearwork of the Greeks is unbreakable.
They hold the line, inflicting horrific casualties. But eventually, a local Greek trader reveals a hidden goat path over the mountains to the Persians. The Persians outflank the pass. Leonidas, knowing they are surrounded, dismisses most of the Greek allies to fight another day, but he and his 300 Spartans stay behind to fight to the death, buying precious time for the rest of Greece to prepare. They are slaughtered to the last man under a rain of arrows.
Thermopylae is a tactical defeat, but a massive psychological victory. It shows the Persians that the Greeks will not break easily. But the Persian army marches south and burns and evacuated Athens to the ground. The Athenians had fled to the nearby island of Salamis. The Athenians had consulted the oracle at Delphi before the invasion, and the oracle cryptically told them to trust in their wooden walls. Some old men thought this meant building a wooden palisade around the Acropolis, but an Athenian general named Themistocles argued brilliantly that the wooden walls were their newly built fleet of triremes. Let's talk about the trireme. It's the ultimate naval weapon of antiquity. It's a sleek, incredibly fast wooden warship with 3 banks of oars, about 170 rowers crammed into a sweaty, synchronized machine. The front of the ship, at the waterline, is a massive bronze-sheathed battering ram. You don't board the enemy ship, you row at ramming speed and smash a hole in their hull to sink them.
Themistocles uses deception. He sends a fake traitor to Xerxes, tricking the Persian king into believing the Greek fleet is trying to flee. Xerxes orders his massive, heavier naval armada into the narrow, treacherous straits of Salamis to block them. It's the exact same tactic as Thermopylae, but on water. The Persian ships are too crowded, they get tangled up in the currents, and the lighter, faster Athenian triremes systematically ram them to pieces.
Xerxes watches his mighty fleet get annihilated from a throne on the hillside. Without his navy to supply his massive army, he is forced to retreat to Asia, leaving a fraction of his army behind, which the unified Greeks destroy the following year at Plataea. The Greeks have done the impossible. They have beaten the greatest empire on earth.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and where our theme of hubris comes roaring back. Beating the Persians doesn't make the Greeks peaceful. It gives the city of Athens a massive, intoxicating superiority complex. They look at themselves and say, "We saved Greece. Our navy won the war. We are the pinnacle of human civilization." This attitude kicks off the Athenian Golden Age, roughly 479 to 431 BC.
The Athenians decide they need to make sure Persia never comes back. So they form the Delian League. On paper, it sounds great. A mutual defense pact of hundreds of coastal and island city-states. Every city agrees to contribute either ships to the allied navy, or if they are too small, just pay a cash tribute into a shared treasury kept on the sacred island of Delos.
But under the leadership of a brilliant, charismatic statesman named Pericles, Athens quietly shifts the balance of power. They realize that by accepting cash from their allies, Athens can build the ships themselves, staffing them with Athenian citizens. Within a few decades, Athens controls an overwhelming naval monopoly.
It turns from a defense league into a protection racket. If a small island decides, hey, the Persians haven't been seen in 30 years, we want to stop paying the tribute, the Athenian fleet shows up, blockades their port, tears down their defensive walls, and forces them back in line. Athens essentially becomes an empire, ruling over other Greeks.
And Pericles eventually moves the allied treasury from Delos directly to Athens. He He uses those funds money paid by allies for defense to launch a massive public works program to beautify his own city. He builds the Parthenon on the Acropolis, a massive, breathtaking marble temple dedicated to Athena.
It's the ultimate flex. And internally, the society is exploding with creativity. Under Pericles, Athens institutes radical democracy. Every single adult male citizen, no matter how poor, can go to the Assembly Hill and vote directly on every piece of legislation, every declaration of war. They use sortition, essentially a lottery machine made of stone, to randomly select citizens for juries so nobody can be bribed. They invent the water clock to time political speeches so nobody talks too long.
The intellectual output is staggering. In the span of a few decades, you have Sophocles and Euripides writing tragedies that explore the depths of human suffering and fate plays that are still performed today. You have Herodotus and Thucydides who decide to write down the history of the wars not by blaming the gods, but by interviewing witnesses and analyzing human motives, inventing the discipline of history. You have Socrates walking barefoot through the marketplace, aggressively questioning the nature of justice and truth, laying the groundwork for Western philosophy.
It is a golden explosion of human thought, but it's built on a dark foundation. We have to push back on the romanticized view of Athens. Was Athens a glorious beacon of democracy and enlightenment, or were they a tyrannical empire holding a knife to the throat of their own allies?
They were absolutely both, and that dual nature terrified the rest of Greece. The city that was most alarmed by Athens' aggressive expansion was their old ally from the Persian Wars, Sparta.
Sparta is the polar opposite of Athens. Athens is a dynamic, culturally vibrant, democratic sea power. Sparta is a deeply conservative, fiercely austere, militaristic land power. Spartan society is structured entirely around producing perfect infantrymen, largely because they needed to violently suppress an enslaved population of helots that outnumbered them 10 to 1.
You have these two superpowers representing two completely incompatible ways of life, forced to share a tiny geographic space. Thucydides, the historian, analyzed the situation and wrote that the growth of Athenian power and the fear it caused in Sparta made war inevitable. This tension finally explodes into the Peloponnesian War.
This is the tragedy of the classical era. From 431 to 404 BC, a grinding 27-year civil war tears the entire Greek world apart. It strips away all the heroic veneer we saw at Troy or Marathon. This is a brutal ideological bloodbath.
The strategy at first is a stalemate. Sparta marches its unbeatable land army to Athens and burns the crops. Athens, using its navy, imports grain from the Black Sea and hides its population behind impenetrable walls, using its fleet to raid the Spartan coast. But in the second year of the war, a devastating plague breaks out inside the overcrowded walls of Athens, killing perhaps a third of the population, including Pericles.
Without their rational leader, the Athenian democracy becomes radicalized and volatile. Demagogues whip the assembly into frenzies, they commit atrocities. When the island of Melos tries to remain neutral, Athens besieges them, slaughters every adult male, and sells all the women and children into slavery. The beacon of democracy is acting like the monsters from their own myths.
The ultimate act of Athenian hubris occurs halfway through the war. In a fit of supreme overconfidence, the Athenian assembly votes to send their massive, incredibly expensive armada on a totally unprovoked invasion of Sicily, hundreds of miles away in Italy, hoping to conquer new wealth.
The Sicilian expedition is a disaster of epic proportions. The Athenian fleet gets trapped in the harbor at Syracuse. The entire armada is destroyed. Tens of thousands of Athenian citizens and rowers are killed or captured and thrown into stone quarries to rot. Athens loses its offensive capability overnight.
Sparta, smelling blood in the water, does the unthinkable. They compromise their own ideals and make a deal with the old enemy. They accept massive amounts of gold from the Persian Empire to build a Spartan navy. With Persian funding, a Spartan admiral eventually ambushes and destroys the last remnants of the Athenian fleet at Aegospotame.
In 404 BC, Athens is starved into submission. They surrender. The Spartans force them to tear down their defensive walls to the music of flute girls. The Athenian Empire is dismantled.
Sparta briefly tries to rule Greece as a hegemon, but they are too rigid and arrogant, and they alienate their own allies. A few decades later, the city of Thebes innovates new phalanx tactics and shatters the Spartan army, destroying the myth of Spartan invincibility forever. Thebes rules briefly, and then they falter.
If we pull back and look at the bigger picture here, the tragedy is profound. The Greeks spent the entire Peloponnesian War desperately fighting to preserve their system of independent, sovereign city-states. But by engaging in decades of unyielding, scorched earth civil war, they bled themselves completely dry. They rendered the polis obsolete. They were too weak, too fractured, and too exhausted to defend themselves against a new threat rising in the north.
A threat from a kingdom they used to mock as uncultured, semi-barbarous hill people. Macedon.
Enter King Philip II of Macedon in the mid-300s BC. The southern city-states are politically spent. Philip has been quietly watching them fight. He has access to massive gold mines, and he uses that wealth to completely revolutionize warfare.
Philip professionalizes the army. He creates a new type of phalanx armed with the sarissa, an 18-foot-long pike that is twice as long as the traditional Greek spear. A Macedonian phalanx is essentially an impenetrable hedgehog of spear points. He integrates this with heavy shot cavalry.
By 338 BC, through a mix of brilliant diplomacy, bribery, and overwhelming military force, Philip crushes a combined army of Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea. In one afternoon, the era of the independent, fiercely sovereign Greek polis is dead. Greece is now subjugated under a single northern kingdom.
Philip plans to lead a united Greek army to exact revenge on the Persian Empire, but he is assassinated at a wedding in 336 BC. The throne of Macedon and control of Greece falls to his 20-year-old son, a young man who had been personally tutored by the philosopher Aristotle, raised on the epics of Homer, and who allegedly slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow.
Alexander III of Macedon, Alexander the Great. Alexander takes his father's unstoppable army, crosses the Hellespont into Asia, and does what the Greeks had dreamed of for a century. He goes to war with the Persian Empire.
The logistics of what Alexander accomplishes are hard to overstate. Over the course of just 13 years, he marches his army across the known world. He defeats the Persian king Darius III in 3 massive pitched battles. He conquers Egypt, where he is declared a pharaoh and a living god. He marches through Babylon, burns the Persian capital of Persepolis, and pushes his army over the Hindu Kush mountains all the way to the borders of India.
He never loses a single battle. He fights at the front of his cavalry, taking arrows to the shoulder and sword strikes to the helmet. He builds an empire stretching from Greece to the Himalayas, but his men finally mutiny in India, refusing to march any further east into the unknown. They turn back, and Alexander dies suddenly of a mysterious fever in Babylon in 323 BC, at the age of just 32.
Because he dies so young without a clear heir, his massive empire instantly shatters. His top generals, known as the Diadochi, tear the empire apart in a series of brutal succession wars. They carve out their own massive kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria and Mesopotamia, and the Antigonids in Macedon and Greece. This marks the end of the classical era and the beginning of the Hellenistic period, running from 323 to 146 BC.
So we have to ask, what does this all mean for the Greeks? Politically, it's a disaster. The days of Pericles debating in the assembly are gone. The city-states are just pawns, constantly being fought over by these massive monarchical successor kingdoms. But
Culturally, they won a total sweeping victory. As Alexander marched across the globe, he founded dozens of cities, famously naming most of them Alexandria. He left behind garrisons of Greek soldiers who intermarried with the local populations. He exported Greek culture, the Greek language, Greek art, theater, and philosophy across the entire Near East.
it creates this incredible syncretism, right? The intellectual capital of the world moves from Athens to Alexandria in Egypt. They build the Great Library of Alexandria, aiming to collect all human knowledge, translating it into Greek. Greek becomes the lingua franca, the universal language of trade and diplomacy, from the Mediterranean to the borders of India. If you wanted to do business, read philosophy, or study mathematics, you did it in Greek.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the final act of our timeline, the Roman conquest. As the Hellenistic kingdoms slowly weaken over the centuries, a new, hyper-aggressive power expands out of the Italian peninsula, Rome.
The Romans are masters of logistics and engineering. They eventually look east, and they systematically dismantle the Macedonian kingdoms. In 146 BC, Rome crushes an uprising by the Achaean League in Greece. To send a message, the Roman legions brutally sack the wealthy Greek city of Corinth, slaughtering the men, enslaving the women, and burning the city to the ground. Greece is officially conquered. It becomes just another province of the Roman Republic. The political story of ancient Greece is over.
But the cultural story proves to be immortal. The Romans conquered Greece militarily, but they were deeply intimidated and seduced by Greek culture. Roman elites learned to speak Greek. They hired captured Greek scholars to tutor their children. They copied Greek marble statues to decorate their villas. They adopted the entire Greek pantheon of gods and just swapped the names. Zeus became Jupiter, Ares became Mars, Aphrodite became Venus.
As the Roman poet Horace famously wrote, captive Greece took captive her fierce conqueror. Rome took the raw intellectual and cultural framework that the Greeks had built and used it to legitimize their own empire. The Roman Empire preserved the Greek legacy, spread it across Western Europe, and eventually, when the western half of the Roman Empire fell, the eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, kept Greek culture, language, and texts alive for another 1,000 years through the Middle Ages.
It is a staggering arc of endurance, a culture born in the rocky, unyielding soil of the Aegean, shaped by the terrifying volatility of the sea. They survived total systemic collapse during the Bronze Age, invented a cosmic mythology to explain their own ruins, and utilized extreme competition to build an intellectual framework that essentially conquered their conquerors.
Let's take a breath and look back at the monumental journey we've just been on. We started 210,000 years ago with early humans surviving ice ages. We paddled across volcanic seas with Stone Age mariners to find obsidian. We walked through the massive, labyrinthine administrative warehouses of the peaceful Minoans and stood under the 10-ton cyclopean walls of the warlike Mycenaeans. We navigated the terrifying sudden darkness of the Bronze Age collapse, which forced illiterate farmers to invent a cosmic mythology of castrating titans, reality TV gods, and tragic heroes fighting at Troy, just to make sense of the ruins around them.
We witnessed the rise of the fiercely independent polis, driven by the geography of isolation. We saw them invent the phonetic alphabet, democratizing reading, and create the Olympics to channel their warfare into athletic glory. We watched a tiny coalition of armored spearmen miraculously defeat the millions of the Persian Empire at Marathon and Salamis, sparking a golden age in Athens that gave the world radical democracy, tragedy, and the scientific method.
And then we watched them tragically, arrogantly tear it all down in the Peloponnesian War, bleeding themselves dry until they were conquered by a northern king whose son, Alexander the Great, took their culture to the edge of the known world, leaving a legacy so profound that even the mighty Roman legions bowed to it intellectually.
And as you, the listener, go about your day, I want you to realize that this isn't just ancient trivia. When you read a text message, you are using the vowels the Greeks added to the alphabet. If you vote in a local election, you are relying on the civic mechanics invented in Athens. If you watch a movie about a flawed hero fighting an inescapable fate, you are experiencing the tragic narrative structure built by Sophocles. If you trust that a disease is caused by biology and not a curse from Apollo, you are standing on the shoulders of the pre-Socratics. You are living, right now, in the long shadow of the Greeks.
I think we've accomplished our mission today. We traced the entire timeline and pulled apart the mechanics of how they lived and thought.
Before we go, I want to leave the listener with one final thought to mull over, returning to our core theme. Throughout all the mythology we discussed today, the absolute worst crime a mortal could commit was hubris. The arrogant pride that makes you believe you are untouchable, that you can outsmart the natural order. It's the lesson of Prometheus stealing fire, of Oedipus trying to outrun his prophecy, of Agamemnon desecrating the altars at Troy. The gods always punish hubris with nemesis, divine retribution. It was their deepest cultural warning.
And yet, they didn't listen to their own warning.
No, they didn't. Look at their actual history. It was the collective hubris of Athens and Sparta, their absolute certainty in their own political supremacy, their refusal to compromise, their arrogant belief that they could subjugate their neighbors without consequence, that drove them into the catastrophic meat grinder of the Peloponnesian War. They destroyed the very civilization, the beautiful, independent polis system that they were so fiercely proud of. The Greeks essentially lived out the exact tragic arc of their own mythologies on a national scale, proving that perhaps, despite all their brilliant philosophy, their armored phalanxes, and their democratic assemblies, they were right about the cosmos all along. No mortal and no empire can outrun its fate.
That is a haunting realization. When you look back at the origins of ancient Greece, it isn't a clean, straight line of progress. It's a chaotic, competitive, violently beautiful mess of history and myth, where the stories they told themselves around the campfire perfectly mirrored the tragedies they inflicted upon themselves centuries later. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.